In the instant that the formation spell emerged, the two of them hovered into the air before looking down at it from above. Li could determine after a brief glance that the formation in front of his eye was indeed the Heaven Void Hall's control formation. Furthermore, at the very center of the formation, he saw a diagram that was completely identical to the Heaven Void Cauldron. This immediately evoked within him a recollection of the scenes back when he had opened the profound Jade Cave in the Spirit Void Hall. The formation that sealed the profound Jade Cave also seemed to have employed a similar restriction. However, this formation was over 10 times the size of that one, and it also seemed to be more complex and profound. The silver-robed woman noticed the flash of recognition in Li's eyes, and as she withdrew her celestial techniques, she asked, "You've also seen this formation before?" "I've seen a similar one somewhere in the North Night Palace," Li replied. The silver-robed woman didn't ask for any further details from Li. Instead, she urged, "I see. That's a good thing. In that case, you should also know how to control this formation right. Perhaps you can see if the Heaven Void Cauldron can be used for that purpose." Heaven Void Cauldron hesitated momentarily before nodding as he opened his mouth. A ball of azure light emerged from within before hovering straight toward the center of the formation. That azure object was none other than the Heaven Void Cauldron, which was currently only several inches in size. Of course, during this process, Li was constantly guarding against the silver-robed woman. If she expressed any intention of stealing the cauldron from him, then he would immediately withdraw it. The Heaven Void Cauldron flew over to the center of the massive formation, where it stopped at Li's behest, right over the image of the massive cauldron down below. Right at this moment, the entirety of the cauldron diagram lit up as a pillar of azure light erupted into the air, encompassing the Heaven Void Cauldron within. Li sensed a disturbance within his spiritual sense, and he lost his connection with the cauldron again. His expression changed drastically as he stole a glance at the silver-robed woman beside him. He was relieved to see that the silver-robed woman hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, and he turned his attention to the Heaven Void Cauldron again. Within the azure pillar of light, the Heaven Void Cauldron began to emit a ringing sound as it swelled drastically in size. Moments later, the cauldron had become the same size as the diagram down below. At the same time, all of the diagrams of the flora and fauna on the cauldron began to manifest themselves. Li felt his spiritual sense stir as he regained his connection with the cauldron. However, his magic power then began to surge toward the cauldron in a wild frenzy, a turn of events that made Li's expression change drastically. Right at this moment, the silver-robed woman suddenly made a hand seal before pointing toward the center of the formation. A white pillar of light shot forth, disappearing into the giant cauldron diagram in a flash. Li immediately felt his rate of magic power loss slow down to an acceptable degree, and his expression eased slightly. If the silver-robed woman hadn't have done that, he would have cut off his flow of magic power immediately and withdrawn the Heaven Void Cauldron. However, the Heaven Void Cauldron was like a bottomless pit, relentlessly engulfing his and the silver-robed woman's magic power. A short while later, half of Li's magic power had been lost, and his expression darkened once again. At this moment, a low rumbling sounded from the formation. Some of the runes began to light up, but they were only glowing very feebly, as if they had only just been activated. "This won't work. Our magic power isn't sufficient to activate this formation." The silver-robed woman's expression changed as she withdrew her hand seal, upon which the azure pillar of light immediately crumbled. Li's brows furrowed as he also snapped off his flow of magic power, before waving a hand toward the cauldron in the distance. The Heaven Void Cauldron swayed as a pillar of light shot forth from within. It then rapidly shrank to its original size in the blink of an eye before disappearing into Heaven Void Cauldron's sleeve. It's not just a matter of insufficient magic power. This control formation can only be used by a deity transformation cultivator. I'm a mid-nascent soul cultivator while you're at the late-nascent soul stage, so there's no way we can succeed. Li looked down at the formation below with his brows tightly furrowed. Following the disappearance of the Heaven Void Cauldron, the pillar of azure light erupting from the giant cauldron diagram also vanished. The rumbling and the flashing lights from the formation down below also receded before everything fell completely silent. After a brief silence, the silver-robed woman said, "It's not necessarily the case that only a deity transformation cultivator can use this formation. If several late-nascent soul cultivators were to join forces, that would also suffice." Li faltered slightly upon hearing this before turning to her with an incredulous look. Surely you jest, fellow Taoist Phoenix. Even 4 late-nascent soul cultivators are no match for a single deity transformation cultivator. You should be well aware of the disparity between the two. In terms of combat prowess, a deity transformation cultivator is able to draw upon the world's origin chi, so a late-nascent soul cultivator is naturally no match. However, I have a secret technique that can temporarily combine the magic power of several cultivators as one. If we use this secret technique to fuel the Heaven Void Cauldron, we should be able to activate this formation, the silver-robed woman replied confidently. Really now, could it be that you want to use my unbroken sink devils and my puppet for this secret technique? Han Li asked with a contemplative look on his face. Hee, you sure are a smart man, fellow Taoist Han. That was exactly my intention. With the combined form of the unbroken sink devils, that puppet and myself, there's a good chance that we'll succeed. The silver-robed woman chuckled, and her icy cold demeanor was replaced by an inviting and seductive one, as if she had transformed into a completely different person. However, Han Li paid no heed to her exquisitely beautiful features. Instead, he was contemplating something in deep thought. You didn't mention my name just then. Am I not able to take part in this secret technique? He asked. That won't work. This secret technique can only be unleashed by cultivators of the same cultivation base. Furthermore, the one who can control this combined magic power must be the participating cultivator with the highest cultivation base. You are far more powerful than any other mid-nascent soul cultivator I've seen, but there is still a large disparity between you and a late-nascent soul cultivator, the silver-robed woman explained with a smile. Han Li's expression suddenly changed as he harumphed coldly, HMPH. In order to control the Heaven Void Cauldron, you must master the artifact imprint technique first. Are you asking me to hand over my Heaven Void Cauldron? A spirit treasure is very valuable, but this is the only way out unless you want to be trapped here forever, the Ice Phoenix replied calmly. Don't even think about it. I won't agree to this no matter what. The silver-robed woman was rather surprised by Han Li's complete lack of hesitation. She raised an eyebrow and was just about to say something when Han Li cut her off coldly. Let me tell you something. This place will open once every 300 years. Even if we don't do anything, we'll still be able to get out. We'll just have to stay here for a while. I've changed my mind now. I'm not in a hurry to leave this place. Instead, I'm going to stay here and cultivate. I'll come and find you if I end up progressing to the late nascent soul stage. Farewell for now, fellow Taoist Phoenix. At the conclusion of that sentence, Han Li transformed into an azure streak of light as he flew away from the stone terrace, disappearing into a blue stone path in the blink of an eye. This place opens once every 300 years. The silver-robed woman was overjoyed to hear this, and she swallowed back the words that were on the tip of her tongue. Even though she had missed out on the chance to snatch away his spirit treasure, it was undoubtedly good news that she wouldn't be trapped here forever after all. She didn't have to worry about Han Li deceiving her, as a mere 300 years was completely negligible for a heavenly spirit beast like her, whose lifespan numbered in the tens of thousands of years. She was originally planning to use a secret technique with self-mutilating side effects that could temporarily grant her deity transformation stage power, thereby allowing her to easily kill Han Li and take his Heaven Void Cauldron. However, using a secret technique like that was extremely taxing to her body. Not only did the user of the secret technique have to be a 10th grade Ice Phoenix, unleashing it would inflict severe damage to the user's essential Tao foundation, making it almost impossible for her to progress to the deity transformation stage in the future. Even for a semi-deity transformation cultivator like her, who had satisfied the prerequisite conditions for making a breakthrough long ago, the consequences were still bound to be catastrophic. As such, she had been very reluctant to employ this course of action. Due to the fact that she was approaching the end of her lifespan, she was planning to make her breakthrough during this recent period of time. However, Old Devil Chi's avatar had then alerted her to the news regarding the spatial node, so she had been recruited to attack the North Night Palace with him, thereby forcing her to set her breakthrough aside. That was why she was still at the late nascent soul stage. Of course, progressing to the deity transformation stage in this place wasn't a bad option either. If she could successfully make her breakthrough, not only would she be able to kill Han Li, she would also be able to take his Heaven Void Cauldron and escape from this place. Unfortunately, Ice Phoenixes were rather special in that they could only make breakthroughs during a special ceremony held in the holy land of the Ice Phoenixes, the Ice Abyss Island. Otherwise, even if a breakthrough were to be successfully made, the Ice Phoenix in question wouldn't be able to make any further breakthroughs in the future. The silver-robed woman didn't dare to take such a risk before she could escape from this place. Of course, Han Li wasn't aware of these things, but he revealed to her the fact that the Heaven Void Hall opened once every 300 years in fear that she would turn on him out of sheer desperation. As long as she could see a glimmer of hope, she wouldn't be inclined to engage Han Li in a battle to the death. What Han Li had said in the end about making a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage was, of course, nothing more than an errant comment. The silver-robed woman didn't take him seriously either. It was not an easy task to make a breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage. There were countless mid-nascent soul cultivators in this world who were unable to make this breakthrough and were confined to the mid-nascent soul stage until their deaths. The silver-robed woman stood on the stone terrace and contemplated to herself for a long while before murmuring, "So be it. I have a few secret techniques I haven't yet fully mastered. This is a good opportunity to hone them now. If I can successfully master them, my chances of victory would improve if I were to engage that man in battle." With that in mind, she stomped a foot onto the ground and abruptly transformed into a streak of light, flying toward the opposite direction that Han Li had gone in. She was also planning to find a suitable stone chamber for her to go into seclusion and cultivate in. Half a day later, Han Li found himself in a secret chamber around 400 feet both in length and width. He sat on the ground with his legs folded in front of him, and there was an off-white pond over 100 feet in diameter situated before him. Spiritual qi intermingled with a fragrant aroma wafted forth from the pond. This place was the mysterious secret chamber on the second floor where Han Li had last met Yuan Yao. Not only was this an extremely well-concealed place, there was also a large spirit well in here, making it an outstanding cultivation venue. However, in order to avoid unforeseen circumstances, Han Li sealed the teleportation formation on this level, making it temporarily ineffective, then used some formation flags to conceal the entire secret chamber. With those measures in place, it would be difficult to find him, even for a 10th grade Ice Phoenix. In all honesty, Han Li didn't want to stay in this place. Instead, he wanted to return to the Heavenly South region as quickly as possible to undo Nangong Wan's soul seal curse. However, lending the Heaven Void Cauldron to the silver-robed woman was no different from committing suicide. A late-nascent soul cultivator like the Ice Phoenix was powerful enough to master the second layer of the artifact imprint technique. In that case, with the cauldron under her control, he would be no match for her in battle even with the puppet and the unbroken sync devils on his side. He was naturally not going to put himself in such a perilous situation. Thankfully, Nangong Wan had already consumed the inner core of the ancient flame toad. Even though that couldn't completely undo the curse, it would definitely be able to delay the outbreak of the curse, thus ensuring her survival for the next 300 years. In that case, he could only set aside his original objective and cultivate in this place instead. Han Li currently had his eyes tightly shut, and if it weren't for the steady rising and fall of his chest, he would like an inanimate object. At the same time, the white mist emanating from the spirit well was slowly drifting toward him, enshrouding him in a veil of mist before transforming into a ball of white mist that completely obscured him within. One day, 1 month, 1 year. Time slowly passed by, and the white mist continued to drift toward Han Li. The white ball of mist remained completely stationary around him without exhibiting any changes, as if it had been born with the creation of the world and would exist for all of eternity. In the blink of an eye, 80 years had passed. On that day, a series of ships of all different sizes were entering and exiting the dock of a certain island in the scattered star seas. There were also some cultivators with advanced cultivation bases flying to and from the island. Aside from the single point through which one could arrive or depart, the rest of the island had been completely sealed by a restriction. Thus, a lively and bustling scene was presented at the dock. Close to the shore, there were several small mountains of different sizes scattered erratically over the land. On the tallest of those mountains, there was a white pavilion, which wasn't exactly intricately crafted, as the entire structure had been built using massive rocks, but it possessed a rather unique and rough charm. On the top level of this 3-story pavilion, there was a blue-robed Taoist priest and a white-robed scholar discussing something with one another as they looked out at the dock. "Senior Marshal Brother Ming, I heard the Starfall Coalition and the Star Palace have clashed in battle again near the Starfall Island. This time, a core formation cultivator from the Starfall Coalition perished during the battle. It appears that the Starfall Coalition has suffered a heavy loss," the scholar said in a slow voice. The conflicts between the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition have been increasing in regularity in the past few years. Looks like we won't be too far away from the next major battle. Come to think of it, the situation is rather strange. The Starfall Coalition has clearly gained the ascendancy in this tug-of-war, claiming over 20 of the 20 islands in the Inner Sea. However, the Star Palace has won most of the battles between the two powers, the blue-robed Taoist priest side. What's so strange about that? The heavenly star sages have cultivated the divine essence effused light, so as long as they don't stray far from the heavenly star island, they're virtually invincible. Didn't you hear about what happened in the battle before the last one? The archsaint of the Six Paths joined forces with Wan Sangu, but were still comprehensively defeated near the heavenly star island. However, the heavenly star sages don't dare to leave the heavenly star island for long, as their cultivation bases would be severely hampered as a result. Hence, both powers are wary of one another, and the victims of this stalemate are small sects like ours. The scholar chuckled coldly. The blue-robed Taoist priest pursed his lips with a gloomy expression and said, "That's true. In the past, these two powers only conscripted troops from surrounding sects, which wasn't too difficult to deal with, as we could just send over a few low-level disciples. But back then, we only had to pay taxes to one side, yet we have to pay taxes to both powers now. Times are getting a lot harder." "Haha, you sure like to burden yourself with unnecessary concerns, Senior Marshal Brother Ming. These matters are not for Foundation establishment disciples like us to think about. Our Marshal Seniors will take care of those matters. As long as our Patriarch is still around, those two powers wouldn't dare to exert too much pressure on us. We just have to last through this 2-year period. After that, we can go back and focus on cultivation." Speaking of which, when I came out of my last period of seclusion, I could sense that I was about to progress from the early Foundation establishment stage, so I must be close to the mid-Foundation establishment stage. A smug expression suddenly appeared on the scholar's face. The blue-robed faltered upon hearing this before an envious look appeared on his face as he said, "If you can progress to the mid-Foundation establishment stage within 100 years, then your aptitude is exceptional. I've been stuck at the mid-Foundation establishment stage for several decades already, yet there hasn't been any inkling to suggest an imminent breakthrough." The scholar waved his hands modestly and said, "You're far too kind, Senior Marshal Brother Ming. Everyone knows that the early Foundation establishment stage bottleneck is completely incomparable to that of the mid-Foundation establishment stage. After I progress to the mid-Foundation establishment stage, there's a good chance that I won't even be able to match your progress." A wry smile appeared on the blue-robed Taoist priest's face upon hearing this, and just as he was about to say something, an earth-shattering boom erupted, immediately following which the entire pavilion began to tremor violently. Both of them were stunned by this sudden turn of events, and after taking a glance at one another, they immediately turned their gaze toward the dock. In the air over 5 kilometers away from the dock, there was a vast expanse of cloud and mist that was surging and tumbling incessantly, and a thunderous noise akin to that of countless rumbling horse hooves could be heard coming from within. Just as this noise erupted, a massive wave over 1,000 feet tall suddenly appeared on the surface of the ocean as a silvery white line hurtled rapidly toward the dock. All of the ships near the dock were immediately thrown into a frenzied panic as they sped toward the dock with all their might. Countless mortals began to abandon their ships as they scrambled onto the shore. In the face of such an astonishingly massive wave, anyone could see that staying on their ships was akin to committing suicide. As for the merchandise and stock on those ships, their fate would be decided by the gods. The blue-robed Taoist priest and the scholar completely ignored this monstrous wave. Instead, they were staring intently at the tumbling clouds and mist in the sky with tense expressions on their faces. Only a short while had passed, and the two of them were already sweating profusely. Not only them, but the expressions on the faces of all of the cultivators on the dock had also changed drastically. Some of them, low-level cultivators, weren't even able to activate their treasures in order to flee the scene, forcing them to descend unsteadily from the air above. The spiritual pressure emanating from the cloud and mist was simply far too astonishing. Even though the two of them were situated so far away, they were still petrified by those spiritual chi fluctuations. It was as if some sort of primordial demon beast were about to descend upon them. At this moment, not only were the buildings near the dock beginning to tremor, the entire massive island was starting to quiver and quake. The blue-robed Taoist priest and the scholar felt as if all of their saliva had run dry, leaving them unable to speak. Right at this moment, 3 streaks of light suddenly flew forth from within the island, appearing above the pavilion in the blink of an eye before rushing separately into the top floor. The light receded, revealing a woman and two men. There was a brawny man in a set of long robes, an elderly azure-robed man with a troubled frown on his face, and a woman with a seductive figure. The Taoist priest and the scholar were finally snapped out of their stunning stupor following the arrival of their martial seniors, and they hurriedly rushed over to pay their respects. "What happened?" the brawny man asked with a grave expression on his face. "I'm afraid I do not know, Marshal Senior. This cloud and mist phenomenon suddenly appeared in the sky over there, and we were just about to contact you using our voice transmission talismans," the blue-robed Taoist priest quickly replied. The three core formation cultivators also began to stare silently into the sky upon hearing that. "What is that thing? Is there some type of high-grade demon beast exhaling that cloud and mist?" the woman asked with furrowed brows. The azure-robed elderly man shook his head with narrowed eyes as he replied, "No, there's no demonic chi within that cloud and mist, so it can't be a demon beast. Also, a demon beast capable of creating such a phenomenon would at least have to be at the metamorphosis stage. There's no way that a demon beast of that caliber would appear here." "Then, could it be a nascent soul stage senior casting a technique?" the brawny man asked with a bewildered look. The elderly man took a deep breath and solemnly said, "That doesn't seem very plausible either. As far as I'm aware, aside from a few nascent soul devils who are proficient in the devilish arts, there aren't any who use cultivation arts that would produce this kind of phenomenon. In my opinion, it looks more like the heavenly premonition indicating that a certain treasure is about to appear." An eager expression appeared on the face of the brawny man upon hearing this. At this moment, an elderly voice suddenly reverberated throughout the entire room. "What's this nonsense about a treasure? You're going to get yourselves killed if you keep thinking like that." The elderly man was startled by this voice before hurriedly standing up straighter. A blue light abruptly appeared, immediately following which a thin middle-aged man emerged in the room. "We pay our respects to Marshal Uncle," the three of them greeted in unison. Both the blue-robed Taoist priest and scholar were surprised to hear this, before they also paid their respects to the middle-aged man. Only then did they catch a clear glimpse of the middle-aged man, to find that he had an unhealthy yellow pallor and a pair of grayish-white eyes, making him appear as if he were blind. The middle-aged man turned his expressionless gaze toward the distance as he said in a cold voice, "HMPH, you sure are full of yourselves. Even if this really is a heavenly premonition indicating the appearance of a treasure, do you think a treasure of this caliber is something you can lay your hands on? Even if by some miracle you were to actually obtain the treasure, you would only be killed for it later on anyway. As far as I know, old Devil Hun is somewhere nearby, and there's no way he'd ignore this phenomenon. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D42B, letter 1D68T, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D5FA. As he looked at the tumbling cloud and mist in the sky, a solemn expression appeared on his face. All three of the core formation cultivators instantly dejected the mention of this old Devil Hun. "Even if we can't obtain this treasure, wouldn't you be able to do so, Marshal Uncle?" The seductive woman was still unwilling to give up on this opportunity. "If it really is some type of treasure, then I'll naturally try to secure it for myself. Other people may be fearful toward old Devil Hun, but I wouldn't mind battling him. It's just a pity that this is most likely not a heavenly premonition indicating the emergence of a treasure," the middle-aged man replied. Right at this moment, a blinding white light suddenly erupted in the sky in the distance. The colorful cloud and mist were instantly reduced to nothingness, and every in the pavilion aside from the middle-aged man were forced to close their eyes. However, at the exact same moment, the space in the above suddenly began to twist and warp, following which enormous spiritual pressure that was several times more intense than before abruptly descended. A pristine white palace emerged amid the white light, emanating a faint light as it hovered in the air. As everyone in the pavilion opened their eyes again, they were immediately dumbstruck by this scene that greeted them. The middle-aged man's facial muscles spasmed upon seeing this as he exclaimed, "That's the Heaven Void Hall. Impossible. It hasn't been 300 years since it last opened." He immediately managed to identify the palace in the distance. The blue-robed Taoist priest and the scholar didn't exhibit any reaction to the mention of the Heaven Void Hall, but the three core formation cultivators were all stunned to hear this. The burly man's voice began to tremble as he exclaimed, "The Heaven Void Hall, the secret realm containing unfathomable ancient treasures. What else could that palace be? It's a little strange that it's appeared before its time, but even if this really is the Heaven Void Hall, no one would be able to enter it without the Heaven Void map fragment anyway. What's that? Someone seems to be approaching it. Just as the middle-aged man was musing to himself in bewilderment, a vast expanse of fiery clouds suddenly came rumbling over from the distance at an incredibly fast speed. The caster of the fiery cloud seemed to have also discovered the phenomenon in the air, and was traveling to the palace to gauge the situation. The middle-aged man's expression changed slightly upon seeing the fiery cloud. He had also intended to travel to the palace, but he immediately changed his mind as a cold light flashed through his eyes. Just as the fiery cloud was about to reach the palace, a burst of five-colored light suddenly flashed from the palace, and an extremely thick pillar of azure light shot forth directly into the ocean. An unfathomably large black hole suddenly appeared on the surface of the ocean. The seawater parted to accommodate the pillar of light, creating a large vortex. However, an even more incredible scene ensued. At the center of the azure pillar of light, a white formation that was several tens of feet in radius emerged without any premonition. White light then flashed from the formation, upon which a man, a woman, and a massive azure cauldron materialized out of thin air. Both of them were still rooted to the spot, seemingly having been temporarily trapped in the pillar of light. At this moment, the fiery cloud was already almost upon them, but it suddenly faltered slightly as if its caster were also at a loss for what to do. However, all of a sudden, an earth-shattering boom erupted from within the white ball of light, sending tremors running through the massive palace. Spatial fluctuations immediately radiated forth, and the palace disappeared amid a burst of piercing white light. The azure pillar of light flashed wildly several times before also crumbling and disappearing, leaving only the man, the woman, and the massive cauldron hovering in the air. The caster of the fiery cloud seemed to have sensed a hint of peril as the cloud immediately swerved around, flying away in the opposite direction amid a resounding boom. However, the woman raised an eyebrow upon seeing this before waving a sleeve through the air. Over 100 translucent swords shot forth from her sleeve, filling the entire sky with eerie glacial light, before sweeping directly toward the fiery cloud. The swords were traveling at an incredible speed, and caught up to the fiery cloud with ease before unleashing a violent bombardment. A roar of shock and rage erupted from within the fiery cloud, following a frosty light flashed in its depths. The cultivator in the cloud seemed to have brought out some kind of treasure. However, the translucent sword seemed to be the bane of the fiery cloud's existence, as the latter quickly crumbled and dissipated. The treasures that had been summoned were also sliced in half before they could unleash any of their power, tumbling from the sky like pieces of scrap materials. The cultivator within the fiery cloud was horrified to see this, and he tried to unleash an evasion technique, but it was already far too late. All of the translucent swords fell at once, and a howl of anguish rang out as the cultivator body and soul were completely destroyed. Clumps of blood and flesh came raining down from above, as the cultivator was slain in what seemed to be the blink of an eye. Not only were the core formation cultivators horrified to see this, a fearful expression had even crept onto the face of the perpetually calm middle-aged man. The brawny man's lips trembled as he forced a smile onto his face, and said, "Martial uncle, was the cultivator in the fiery cloud one of old Devil Hun's disciples?" The middle-aged man took a deep breath and replied dryly, "That was no disciple, that was none other than old Devil Hun himself. Otherwise, who else would have been able to unleash such a powerful scorching flame technique?" Even though the three-core formation cultivators had suspected this to be the case, they still couldn't help but draw a sharp breath in unison upon having the notion confirmed by the middle-aged man. "But old Devil Hun is a nascent soul cultivator just like you, martial uncle. How could he have been slain so easily? It looks like not even his nascent soul had a chance to escape." The seductive woman was completely dumbfounded. The azure-robed elderly man and the brawny man were also incredulous. The middle-aged man didn't say anything in response. Instead, he was staring intently at the events unfolding in the distance. At this moment, the man and the woman in the air seemed to have exchanged a few words, upon which the woman chuckled coldly in response. She then summoned all of her flying swords back to her before disappearing into the distance as a streak of light over 100 feet in length. The man shook his head before turning his attention to the dock. He then transformed into a rather unremarkable streak of azure light as he flew toward the island, and the speed of his movement wasn't all that astonishing either. However, the middle-aged man's expression changed upon seeing this, and he urgently instructed, "You three stay in here and keep your guard up. I'll be back soon." As soon as his voice fell, the middle-aged man shot forth out of the pavilion as a blue streak of light to meet the oncoming streak of azure light. All of the people left in the pavilion began to look at one another. They had just witnessed that woman slay a cultivator of the same caliber as their martial uncle, as if she were crushing an ant. This man had accompanied her out of the Heaven Void Hall, so his cultivation base was most likely nothing to scoff at either. As such, all of them were feeling very nervous. Not only them, but even the middle-aged man flying toward the azure streak of light was also feeling very uneasy. However, after witnessing that woman in action from afar, he immediately made up his mind. That woman was most likely a late nascent soul cultivator comparable to the likes of the heavenly star sages and the arch-saint of the Six Paths. If they had harbored ill intentions toward them, then there was no way he would have been able to escape. After all, he was merely an early nascent soul cultivator, and there was simply too large a disparity between their power levels. As such, the best course of action was for him to voluntarily greet them in person, instead of trying to flee. Thus, after making up his mind, this early nascent soul cultivator mustered up his courage and flew toward Han Li. The two streaks of light converged together in a few moments. The azure light receded, and Han Li was revealed. The middle-aged man also stopped over 100 feet away, before turning his gaze toward Han Li. He discovered that the person standing before him was a young man in a set of azure robes. His looks were average, and his skin was slightly dark. He currently wore a hint of a smile on his face and was also looking back at the middle-aged man. The middle-aged man unleashed his spiritual sense to detect Han Li's cultivation base, upon which his pupils contracted minutely as he joined his hands together in a salute. "I'm Elder Gan Lin of the Yellow Sand Sect. May I ask for your esteemed name, and do you require any assistance from me?" Even though the middle-aged man was speaking to Han Li as equals, his tone and choice of words were extremely respectful. Han Li examined the middle-aged man upon hearing this before smiling as he said, "My surname is Han. I recall hearing about the Yellow Sand Sect once, but it's been too long and I can't remember it too well. Is this island under the sect's ownership?" "Our sect is merely a small, insignificant sect in the scattered star seas, so it's not strange for you to have not heard of it, fellow Taoist. If you'd like, you can come to visit our sect." The middle-aged man was very relieved to see that Han Li seemed to be quite benevolent and amicable. However, he still didn't dare to show any dissent. He had just verified with his spiritual sense that Han Li was indeed a late nascent soul cultivator, so he had to be extra careful. Following an extended period of cultivation lasting more than 80 years, Han Li had finally escaped from the Heaven Void Hall. In the beginning, he had spent 60 years cultivating with the assistance of the spirit well to reach the pinnacle of the mid-nascent soul stage. He then used the next 20 years to fortify his cultivation base in order to achieve the prerequisites for a breakthrough. After that, he had attempted to break through the bottleneck, hoping that he would get lucky. The result left him rather speechless. He discovered that his attempt to make a breakthrough encountered no impediment whatsoever, taking to the late nascent soul stage with ease. Even after he had become a late nascent soul cultivator, he was still in disbelief. After all, it had been an extremely arduous process for him to make the breakthrough to the mid-nascent soul stage, and he had only succeeded after preparing all types of pills and medicines to assist him during the process. For this attempt at breaking through to the late nascent soul stage, he had only prepared some ordinary pills and didn't really harbor any high hopes, but the process had been as simple as breathing air. The ease with which he had made the breakthrough left him extremely perplexed. He pondered the process over and over again, but still couldn't make sense of the situation. Perhaps this was because the great development technique he had cultivated in conjunction with the nascent cultivating pill that he had consumed had finally taken effect. Perhaps the rainbow bead manifested from his consumption of the Heaven Men pill had improved the aptitude of his spiritual roots. Perhaps the azure essence sword art he had cultivated made it much easier for him to progress to the late nascent soul stage. Perhaps his cultivation base was simply far superior to other cultivators of the same level. All of the aforementioned factors were plausible possibilities, and it could also be the case that a combination of those factors was the answer he was seeking. In the end, Han Li gave up on trying to identify the underlying reasons. After all, it was impossible to replicate the conditions for any successful breakthrough to the late nascent soul stage. Otherwise, great cultivators would have been a lot more common in the human world. After making his breakthrough, Han Li naturally refined his 8-spirit ruler and heaven-void cauldron again, then easily mastered the second layer of the artifact imprint technique before setting off in search of the silver-robed woman, who had also been cultivating in seclusion the entire time. When they met, her jaw dropped to the ground upon making the discovery that Han Li had become a late-nascent soul cultivator. As a result, she completely relinquished any thoughts of attacking Han Li. Through the use of the secret technique that she provided, the two of them, in conjunction with the 5 devils and the humanoid puppet, really were able to activate the control formation, thereby forcing the Heaven-Void Hall to temporarily reveal itself over the scattered star seas. The two of them then used the control formation to teleport themselves out of the hall, along with the Heaven-Void Cauldron. As for the cultivator who had unleashed the fiery cloud, he was simply very unlucky. The Ice Phoenix had been trapped in the Heaven-Void Hall for close to a century, and had been very flustered by Han Li's easy progression to the late nascent soul stage. Just as she was at the height of her frustration, old Devil Hun delivered himself to her doorstep as a living punching bag, an offer which she naturally wasn't going to refuse. After that, she left Han Li behind to search for a way back to the Great Jin. Even though Han Li's cultivation base had taken a significant stride forward, he still didn't like his chances in battle against her, so he let her leave. Of course, he wasn't going to tell her about the ancient teleportation formation that led to the heavenly south region. After Han Li separated with the Ice Phoenix, he stowed away the Heaven-Void Cauldron before flying toward the island. He naturally wasn't going to cause trouble for the cultivators on the island. Instead, he simply wanted to gauge his current location and gain an understanding of the situation in the scattered star seas. He would then figure out how to return to the Stalwart Star Island, where he would be able to find that ancient teleportation formation. The fact that this middle-aged man was taking the initiative to come to him and was extending such a warm invitation was rather surprising to Han Li. However, his intention was to visit the island anyway, so he decided to accept this man's invitation. At this current power level, he wasn't afraid of a mere early nascent soul cultivator trying to plot against him. The middle-aged man was both surprised and elated to see Han Li accept his invitation, and he hurriedly sent a message to his 3 juniors using his voice transmission talisman, before guiding Han Li toward the island in a respectful manner. Han Li began to inquire about the surrounding area to discover that the island before them was named the Bitter Gate Island. It was quite a large island with several cities inhabited by mortals alone, and the entire island was completely under the Yellow Sand Sect's control. Several million kilometers to the north of the Bitter Gate Island lay the Star Climb Island, one of the 12 inner star islands. Han Li's heart stirred upon hearing this. With his exceptional memory, he still had a remarkably clear recollection of the map depicting the scattered star seas. If he weren't mistaken, then the place he was currently situated at wasn't far away from the Heavenly Star City. However, it was quite a distance away from the Stalwart Star Island, and he would be passing by the Heavenly Star City on the way there. The vast number of demon beasts in the scattered star seas was completely incomparable to that of the Heavenly South region and the Great Jin. However, Han Li wasn't interested in the demon cores of low-grade demon beasts anymore. In contrast, the demon cores of metamorphosis stage demon beasts at the 8th grade or above have all attained intelligence, so it would be impossible to lure them with the rainbow skirt grass. Otherwise, he wouldn't mind making another trip to the outer star seas. With that in mind, Han Li allowed himself to be led by the middle-aged cultivator over the dock. Then, after traveling several thousand kilometers into the island, they arrived in the air above a tall mountain with gorgeous scenery and an abundance of spiritual qi. At the mountain's peak was a series of grand and lavish palaces and pavilions. There were even a few unidentifiable, yet exceptionally beautiful creatures circling and dancing in the air above, creating a scene that resembled an immortal paradise. Han Li turned to the middle-aged cultivator with a smile and said, "Your sect seems to be thriving, fellow Taoist Gan." "Haha, I'm glad you like it, Brother Han. We're just a bunch of nobodies setting up a base here," the middle-aged man chuckled with a wry smile. He knew that to a nascent soul cultivator, these illusions would be easily seen through. Han Li smiled but didn't say anything. However, before the two of them could descend, heavenly music began to play from the mountain peak. 2 groups of beautiful female cultivators wearing palatial dresses of all types of colors made their way out of the palaces down below. They were led by none other than Tay 3 core formation cultivators from earlier, all of whom were looking up at Han Li with awe and veneration in their eyes. Han Li couldn't help but burst into laughter upon seeing this, but he still descended in front of the welcoming party down below. Everyone made way to create a path for him leading to one of the main halls on the mountain peak. To Han Li's surprise, the decor inside was rather plain and simple, certainly not as lavish as he had expected. The middle-aged man and Han Li sat down at the table, while the other three stood off to the sides. Han Li cut straight to the chase, and began to inquire about the recent situation in the scattered star seas. The middle-aged man was rather taken aback by these questions, but he merely regarded Han Li as a certain powerful being who had been in seclusion for many years, and naturally disclosed everything that he knew. When Han Li heard that the scattered star seas was in far more turmoil than when he had left, he couldn't help but fall silent to digest that information. After contemplating for a long while, the middle-aged man finally decided that Han Li didn't seem to be a cruel and violent person. As such, he mustered up his courage and asked, "Brother Han, was the place that you emerged from the legendary Heaven Void Hall? How did you come out of that place?" Han Li's expression changed upon hearing this, and he was snapped out of his train of thought. "You sure are knowledgeable to be able to recognize the Heaven Void Hall from a single glance, fellow Taoist Han. I was trapped there for a period of time and have only just escaped," Han Li replied nonchalantly. The middle-aged man could tell that Han Li didn't want to elaborate on this matter, so he didn't dare to pry any further. Instead, he changed the subject to the Ice Phoenix. "I see. May I ask who that woman with you was?" "She was a fellow Taoist who had been trapped in the hall with me. She had some important matters to attend to, so she had to leave," Han Li replied indifferently. "I see. Was she also a late nascent soul cultivator like you, Brother Han?" the middle-aged man asked carefully. She reached the late nascent soul stage long ago. I cannot hope to compare with her," Han Li chuckled in response. The middle-aged cultivator's heart stirred upon hearing this, and his mind scrambled through the list of renowned female cultivators in the scattered star seas. However, he simply wasn't able to identify that silver-robed woman. As for Han Li, his appearance was far too plain, making it even more difficult to identify him. However, that wasn't a cause for any alarm or confusion. It was very common for cultivators of their caliber to go into seclusion and cultivate for centuries at a time. "Fellow Taoist Gan, I'm currently in dire need of a batch of mid-grade spirit stones and materials. Of course, it would be best if you had high-grade spirit stones. I currently have 2 treasures which I'm not using at the moment, and I'd be happy to offer them for exchange," Han Li suddenly said. He then swept a sleeve over the wooden table beside him, upon which a green light swept past and 2 items appeared on the table, one of which was silver while the other was yellow. They were a silver ring and an ancient yellow halberd. These were none other than the ancient treasures he had obtained after killing those high-grade demon beasts in the Spirit Void Hall. Treasures of this caliber were naturally useless to Han Li, but in a place like the scattered star seas, where refinement materials and treasures were very rare, these treasures would be extremely sought after. From the spiritual power emanating from the 2 treasures alone, one could determine that they were high-grade treasures that were rare even among ancient treasures. "You're far too kind, Brother Han. We'll have no issue sourcing mid-grade spirit stones and materials for you. We have extensive stock on both here in the sect, and even if there are some materials that we don't have, I can get people to source them from the markets on the island. As for high-grade spirit stones, I'm afraid there are only about 7 or 8 of them on the entire island. If you require them, we'd be happy to exchange them with you." Flames of desire had also been ignited in the middle-aged man's heart upon seeing those 2 ancient treasures, but he wasn't surprised at all in Han Li's ability to bring out treasures of this caliber so easily. 7 or 8 high-grade spirit stones. A peculiar look appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing that. According to his knowledge, the shortage of spirit stones in the scattered star seas was even more severe than in the heavenly south region. How could this Yellow Sand sect alone possess so many high-grade spirit stones? The middle-aged man was initially rather concerned to see the contemplative look on Han Li's face. However, a thought quickly occurred to him, along with a sense of enlightenment. "Haha, apologies for the confusion. It's my fault for neglecting to mention this to you. Over 100 years ago, someone discovered an extremely large spirit stone mine on an island in the outer sea. There were many high-grade spirit stones excavated from that mine, so even though they're still quite rare, the shortage is nowhere near as severe as it was in the past. Almost all of the sects have a few in storage now." A high-grade spirit stone mine, A mine of that caliber exists in the human world. Han Li was very surprised to hear this. Indeed, everyone thought that these were merely fake rumors in the beginning. However, the Star Palace and the Starfall Coalition then engaged in a massive battle for ownership rights over the island. Only then did we realize that the news had been true. I heard that the mine had even drawn the attention of high-grade demon's beast from the outer star seas, and they also joined in on the battle. Many cultivators and demon beasts perished as a result, and now, the mine has been split between the two sides to accommodate a temporary truce. The middle-aged man explained. Han Li nodded but didn't say anything. This was good news for him. After using his humanoid puppet on the previous few occasions, his supply of high-grade spirit stones was about to run dry, and this presented a good opportunity to obtain some more. Thankfully, this region wasn't very far away from the Heavenly Star City, and he would be passing it on the way to his ultimate destination anyway. As such, it wouldn't take him too much time to make a detour and use the Star Palace's teleportation formation to travel directly to that mine. Thus, Han Li immediately made up his mind. He immediately pulled out a jade slip from his storage pouch and copied a list of required materials into it. The brawny core formation cultivator then accepted the jade slip and went away to source those materials at the middle-aged man's behest. After that, Han Li began to make small talk with this grand elder of the Yellow Sand Sect. The middle-aged man was clearly trying to be respectful and hospitable, so Han Li naturally conversed with him in an amicable manner as well. It was a rare occasion for the middle-aged man to encounter a late-nascent soul great cultivator, so he naturally raised a few questions about his own cultivation. Han Li only just reached the late-nascent soul stage, but he had seen a vast array of cultivation arts and had cultivated in both righteous and devilish secret techniques. As such, his experiences really were able to provide inspiration to the middle-aged man, which made him even more respectful toward Han Li. As for the azure-robed elderly man and the seductive woman standing off the sides, they were also listening intently to this conversation. This was an extremely rare opportunity for them as well, after all. Several hours later, a streak of light flashed into the room, and the brawny man returned with a bulging storage pouch in his hand. "Senior, there are a few materials on the list that are missing on this island, but I've gathered everything else. I've placed all of our high-grade spirit stones into the pouch as well." The brawny man strode forward and offered the storage pouch to Han Li with both hands. Han Li accepted the storage pouch and scanned through its contents with his spiritual sense, upon which a content look appeared on his face at what he saw. "I still have some matters that I must attend to, so I won't stay any longer. I'll be taking my leave now." Han Li put away the storage pouch before nodding at the middle-aged cultivator sitting across from him. He had no interest in making further conversation with these Yellow Sand Sect cultivators, so he transformed into a streak of azure light and disappeared into the distance in a flash. "That senior has finally left. I thought our Yellow Sand Sect was in big trouble this time. That senior Han doesn't appear to be a bad person." After Han Li had disappeared into the distance, the seductive woman heaved a long sigh of relief and fanned her chest with an expression that suggested that she had just survived a perilous ordeal. The middle-aged man glared at the woman upon hearing this, before transmitting his voice to all of the cultivators present. "Don't speak nonsense like that. That man is a late-nascent soul cultivator, and his spiritual sense encompasses a far greater area than you can imagine. What you say next could still be sensed by him." The seductive woman was given a fright upon hearing this, and immediately fell silent. The brawny man and the azure-robed man exchanged a glance with one another, and also remained silent. The middle-aged man sat in his chair with his head lowered slightly, and a cold light flashing indistinctly in his grayish-white eyes. 10 minutes later, the light in his eyes receded as he said, "He should be over 500 kilometers away now, so he won't be able to detect what's going on here anymore. However, it's still better to be safe than sorry." As his voice fell, he flicked a finger and a spot of green light shot forth, disappearing into a thick pillar nearby. The pillar emitted a rumbling sound as faint green light appeared over its surface. The pillars nearby also began to resonate with that pillar, creating a barrier of green light that encompassed the small area within which the four cultivators were situated. "We can say whatever we want now." The middle-aged man's expression finally eased after doing all that. "You sure are cautious, Martial Uncle." The seductive woman gave a wry smile. "When dealing with such a fearsome being, you can never be too safe." The middle-aged man harumphed coldly. "Martial Uncle is right. It's also often the case that cultivators of that level have rather peculiar personalities. If we unintentionally offend him with our words, then our entire sect could be destroyed in a fit of rage. Come to think of it, I can't seem to recall these two among the renowned nascent soul cultivators in our scattered star seas, but that man seems to have extensive knowledge of our scattered star seas, so he doesn't seem like a foreigner. Perhaps he really has been in seclusion for a long time. The brawny yellow-robed man mused hesitantly. Meanwhile, the azure-robed man's brows were tightly furrowed, and he remained completely silent with his head lowered. The middle-aged man noticed this and asked, "What are you thinking, Xianxia? I have a feeling that this man is rather familiar, as if I've seen him somewhere before." The elderly man raised his head and said in a slow voice, "You've seen him before." Everyone turned to him with surprised expressions upon hearing this. His appearance was very ordinary. "Could it be that you're mistaking him for someone else?" the seductive woman asked. "His looks are indeed quite plain, but I'm sure I've seen this man a long time ago. I've got it. His surname is Han, and he was the man who was being hunted down by the Starfall Coalition all those years ago." The elderly man finally managed to identify Han Li. The middle-aged man was initially stunned to hear this before his expression darkened, and he asked, "The Starfall Coalition was hunting down a nascent soul cultivator. Why do I not know of this?" "You're misunderstanding me, Martial Uncle. At the time, they were hunting down a core formation cultivator, not a nascent soul cultivator. You were away at the time, while Junior Martial Brother Quan and Junior Martial Sister Jing hadn't yet reached the core formation stage. As such, Senior Martial Brother Ma and I were responsible for looking after the sect. We didn't think this was an important matter at the time, so we didn't report it to you. This was close to 200 years ago. I still have the wanted Jade slip with me." The elderly man was sweating profusely as he explained. He rummaged through his storage pouch before producing a Jade slip, which he handed over to the middle-aged man. "Nonsense. You're telling me this man went from the core formation stage to the late nascent soul stage in less than 200 years. The middle-aged man's expression only grew darker upon hearing this. However, he still accepted the Jade slip and used his spiritual sense to scan through its contents, upon which an incredulous look immediately appeared on his face. There was a projection hovering within the Jade slip depicting a man in a set of azure robes with a faint smile on his face. It was completely identical to Han Li in every way, and there was absolutely no chance that it was someone who merely resembled Han Li. Waves of shock immediately surged through the middle-aged man's heart. He read through the accompanying message in the Jade slip before withdrawing his spiritual sense. A contemplative look appeared on his face as he sat in silence. The three core formation cultivators also remained silent at the sight of the grave expression on the middle-aged man's face. They were waiting for a verdict from the latter. A decisive look finally appeared on the middle-aged man's face as he instructed in a cold voice, "Looks like I really did aim a false accusation at you, Martial Nephew. The man wanted by the Starfall Coalition really is that man. Listen up. Keep this matter strictly confidential. The Starfall Coalition is a colossal force, but this man isn't the core formation cultivator that he once was, either. I don't want our sect being swept up in their conflict. Otherwise, we could easily be crushed by either side." "Yes," the three core formation cultivators hurriedly replied. The middle-aged cultivator seemed to have gone through a period of extensive contemplation before he delivered a series of instructions. "The three of you are prohibited from leaving the sect for 30 years. Go back and focus on cultivation. I have a really bad feeling about this. Two great cultivators have suddenly appeared, and one of them has bad blood with the Starfall Coalition. The scattered star seas is most likely going to be plunged into even more chaos from now on. Tell all of the other disciples to exercise more restraint as well, and tell them not to leave the island unless they absolutely have to. Our sect has to go into hiding for now." The other three cultivators were stunned to hear this, but they could only do as they were told. After that, the three of them left the hall to enact his orders. The middle-aged man was the only one left sitting in the hall. His expression was extremely conflicted and indecisive, as if he were grappling with a difficult decision. After a long while, a self-deprecating look appeared on his face as he sighed. "So be it. Even if he really is the cultivator who obtained the Heaven-Void Cauldron all those years ago, and that giant cauldron really is the Heaven-Void Cauldron, what does it have to do with me? There are perhaps people in this world who can take treasures from great cultivators, but I'm certainly not one of them. If I were to spread news of this, I would most likely be killed." He then swept his sleeve through the air and disappeared as a streak of blue light. The hall was completely empty again. At this point, Han Li had already left the island, and he was naturally unaware of the fact that a mere yellow sand sect had managed to identify who he was, and that the middle-aged cultivator had even managed to determine that he was in possession of the Heaven Void Cauldron. However, this made sense as the fact that the Heaven Void Cauldron had been taken was not well known among normal cultivators, but the news had spread like wildfire among nascent soul cultivators. If it weren't for the fact that Han Li had teleported into the Umbra realm and just so happened to return to the Heavenly South region thereafter, he would have most likely been hunted down by a bunch of nascent soul cultivators had he remained in the scattered star seas. As for the Starfall Coalition's attempts to hunt down Han Li, that was simply born from the frustration of Zenith Yin and the other old monsters following their fruitless search. They wanted to force Han Li to reveal himself, but he had already left the scattered star seas, so their plans naturally concluded in failure. After the passage of so many years, the events surrounding the Heaven Void Cauldron had already become myths and legends. The order to hunt down Han Li had never been withdrawn, but everyone had already forgotten about it. However, news of the Heaven Void Hall's appearance still quickly spread through the scattered star seas. It turned out that the vast majority of the cultivators who had witnessed the phenomenon on the Bittergate Island were nondescript low-grade cultivators, but there were two core formation cultivators who were passing by and just so happened to have seen a passage about the Heaven Void Hall in a tome they had read. As such, they naturally spread this news. As the rumors began to spread, the story naturally became a little shaky over time. For example, the story about the Ice Phoenix slaying the nascent soul cultivator in cold blood transformed into a version where Old Devil Hun had just endured a grueling battle before being slain by two nascent soul cultivators together. Thus, this piece of news was still quite shocking, but nowhere near as impactful as the true sequence of events. In contrast, Han Li attracted a lot of attention as he had been seen manipulating the giant cauldron that was suspected to be the Heaven Void Cauldron, thereby influencing many people to draw a connection between him and the man from all those years ago. As such, many nascent soul cultivators were itching to spring into action. Han Li wasn't even aware that an order to hunt him down had been passed by the Starfall Coalition, nor did he know that most nascent soul cultivators possessed a portrait of him. Otherwise, he would have altered his appearance and traveled in a more secretive manner. At his current power level, he naturally wasn't afraid of being attacked by ordinary cultivators, but he didn't want to draw any trouble to himself either, as that would be a waste of his time. At present, he was flying toward the Heavenly Star City as a streak of azure light according to the map in his hand. Han Li passed by several islands along the way, and on each occasion, he had exchanged for all of the high-grade spirit stones on the island using treasures or rare materials. In doing so, he had obtained over 20 high-grade spirit stones. Han Li was naturally ecstatic and was even more eager to reach the spirit stone mine. Han Li also encountered many cultivators along the way, but most of them were low-grade ones, and none of them dared to get in his way, so he was granted free passage for the entire journey thus far. Among those cultivators, there were only 2 or 3 of the more powerful ones casting confused glances toward Han Li. Aside from that, no one else paid him any heed. Most of them were oblivious to the fact that they had just flown past a late nascent soul cultivator. After flying for over a month, a black spot appeared on the horizon. After flying for a few more hours, Han Li finally saw the Heavenly Star City in the distance, extending all the way into the clouds, and a smile appeared on his face. Right at this moment, a dozen or so streaks of light suddenly hurtled toward Han Li from the distance. Han Li scanned through these approaching streaks of light with his spiritual sense, and he was rather surprised by what he discovered. The streaks of light were all cultivators, and in the oncoming group, there were 4 or 5 core formation cultivators and even an early nascent soul cultivator. Furthermore, the aura of the nascent soul cultivator struck him with a sense of familiarity, and a suspicious look immediately appeared on his face. However, he chose to remain standing on the spot and didn't take any evasive measures. The group of cultivators before him were clad in Star Palace attire, clearly indicating that they had just come from the Heavenly Star Island. Han Li was flying through the air without any intention of obscuring his own presence, so he was naturally spotted by this group of cultivators. As such, they immediately flew toward Han Li. However, Han Li had used a technique to completely obscure his cultivation base. Thus, regardless of whether a foundation establishment or core formation cultivator tried to ascertain his cultivation base with their divine sense, they were struck by the feeling that Han Li was like a ball of cloud and mist, thereby preventing them from being able to determine his cultivation base. Right at this moment, a cry of surprise rang out from the group. Han Li's expression changed as he turned toward the cultivator with the snowy white cloak obscuring their features. This cultivator's entire body was enshrouded in a massive cloak, making it impossible for Han Li to determine their gender. Furthermore, even Han Li's powerful spiritual sense was unable to see through the cloak. This was quite a surprising discovery to him. However, the aura emanating from this person was rather familiar to Han Li, and they were the only nascent soul cultivator in the group, so he was naturally determined to find out who this person was. As such, a blue light flashed through his eyes as he attempted to use his bright-sight spirit eyes to forcibly see through the cloak. "Greetings, fellow Taoist Han. Long time no see, how have you been?" However, right at this moment, an attractive chuckle sounded from beneath the cloak, following which the hood of the cloak was lifted to reveal a set of gorgeous porcelain-like features that carried a hint of a smile. "Ling Yuling," Han Li exclaimed upon seeing the face beneath the hood. This person was none other than the beautiful Star Palace cultivator, whom he had saved all those years ago outside the heavenly Star City. Han Li laid a finger on his own nose, as a smile also appeared on his face. "To think that you would still recognize me after so many years apart, I feel extremely honored. Also, I must congratulate you on progressing to the nascent soul stage." Ling Yuling smiled as he appraised Han Li carefully, upon which a hint of surprise appeared on his face. He was also unable to ascertain Han Li's cultivation base, but he knew that Han Li's cultivation base was definitely not inferior to his. Upon establishing that, the smile on his face became even warmer and more inviting. "You're far too kind, fellow Taoist Ling. Haven't you also progressed to the nascent soul stage?" Ling Yuling smiled but didn't reply right away. Instead, he turned his head and instructed in a cold voice, "You guys go on ahead first. I have some things I have to discuss with fellow Taoist Han, and I'll catch up to you guys later." "Yes, Elder." The other Star Palace cultivators all bowed respectfully upon hearing this. From the respectful expressions on their faces, it could be seen that they were extremely obedient and reverent toward this elder. A hint of surprise appeared in Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, but his expression remained unchanged. Those cultivators continued on their way, led by a late-core formation stage elderly man, and disappeared into the distance in the blink of an eye. Ling Yuling turned back to Han Li and sighed, "Sorry about that, Brother Han. I've received orders to reinforce an island that's being attacked by the Starfall Coalition, so I won't be able to stay here for too long. I've also heard on my way here that the Star Palace is engaged in battle with the Starfall Coalition again. It's no wonder that you're burdened by these duties," Han Li replied in a slow voice. A wry smile appeared on Ling Yuling's face upon hearing this. However, he quickly turned his attention to Han Li again, upon which a peculiar look appeared on his face. He hesitated momentarily before asking, "Brother Han, you've gone beyond the early nascent soul stage, haven't you?" In response, Han Li chuckled and gave an ambiguous reply, "Haha, I've only gone slightly ahead. With your aptitude, it's only a matter of time before you exceed your current cultivation base." Ling Yuling's expression faltered slightly upon hearing this, as waves of shock churned through his heart. It was incredible to him that Han Li had already become a mid-nascent soul cultivator. It had only been less than 200 years since they had last met, yet Han Li had progressed from the core formation stage to the mid-nascent soul stage. That was simply unheard of. After a brief stunned silence, Ling Yuling finally managed to recompose himself, but his expression was still filled with envy as he said, "Looks like you really are an extraordinary prodigy, Brother Han. To think that you've been able to make such drastic improvements in such a short time, I am truly in awe." "I'm no prodigy. I've simply been lucky and encountered many opportunities," Han Li gave another ambiguous reply. Ling Yuling didn't linger any further on this topic. Instead, a smile appeared on his face as he asked, "Is there something you want to do here, Brother Han? I'd be happy to offer my assistance if required. I'd like to take a trip to the outer star seas, so I was hoping to be able to use the Star Palace's teleportation formation." Han Li didn't try to hide his intentions. "If that's the case, then it's a good thing that you ran into me, Brother Han. Due to the fact that we're trying to guard against Starfall Coalition cultivators infiltrating the palace from the outer seas, most of the teleportation formations leading to the outer seas have been shut down. There are only 2 left that are currently in use. I'll give you a badge and with it, you'll be granted access to the teleportation formations." Ling Yuling gave Han Li a gentle smile, and he appeared to be completely identical to an exquisite beauty. However, the way in which he spoke and acted wasn't feminine in the slightest. The combination of the two presented a unique and indescribable allure. At his current cultivation base, Han Li was naturally immune to the effects of Ling Yuling's beauty. Furthermore, he was confident that he would be able to take care of the guards and restrictions standing between him and the teleportation formations he wanted to access. However, it was always a good thing to be able to avoid such troubles and hindrances. Thus, Han Li accepted the badge with a smile. The two of them chatted for a while longer before Han Li bade farewell to Ling Yuling, transforming into a streak of azure light as he hurtled toward the massive island in the distance. Ling Yuling looked on in the direction that Han Li had disappeared in, and the smile on his face gradually faded. He lowered his head and contemplated momentarily before suddenly patting his storage pouch to produce a silver voice transmission talisman. He said something in a low voice into the talisman before raising his hand into the air. The talisman transformed into a ball of light before disappearing into space. After doing all that, Ling Yuling heaved a faint sigh with a resigned expression before putting on his hood again. He then transformed into a streak of light in pursuit of his subordinates, who had gone on ahead. After Ling Yuling had flown away into the distance, a silver light flashed in the air nearby as an azure figure emerged from thin air. He turned toward the direction that the voice transmission talisman had flown away in before disappearing once again. 10 minutes later, at a certain location several tens of kilometers away, there was a man hovering in the air. This man was none other than Han Li himself. He currently had his hands clasped behind his back and was completely expressionless. A humanoid figure suddenly flashed before him, upon which his puppet appeared. It raised a hand to reveal what appeared to be a fiery snake scrambling over his palm. However, it was sealed within a ball of silver light and was unable to escape. Han Li raised an eyebrow before reaching out to grab the fiery snake. The latter immediately exploded on its own, transforming into a ball of raging fire. Han Li quickly scanned through the fireball with his spiritual sense, upon which a dark expression appeared on his face. A cold light flashed through his eyes before he abruptly brought his 5 fingers together, crushing the fireball as he did so. He turned toward the massive island upon which the Heavenly Star City was situated, and his eyes narrowed. So everyone in the scattered star seas knows that I have the Heaven Void Cauldron. Looks like I'll need a disguise, Han Li murmured to himself. His face was then abruptly enshrouded under a layer of light, making his facial features blurry and indistinct. At the same time, a series of crackles and pops rang out from all over his body, instantly making him around a foot taller. A short while later, he had transformed into a burly man with a dark complexion. He put away his puppet and flew toward the Heavenly Star City. Unbeknownst to Han Li, in the instant that he had crushed the voice transmission talisman, someone sitting in a dim underground cave of the Heavenly Star City's sacred mountain was alerted to what he had done. The humanoid figure abruptly rose to his feet before feigning a grabbing motion. Spots of fiery light then began to appear in the air nearby, before converging to form the very same fireball that Han Li had just crushed. The humanoid figure scanned through the information in the fireball with his spiritual sense before flipping his hand over, upon which the fireball instantly disappeared. What's going on? Why is Yuling using voice escape talisman we gave him? These talismans are very rare and he wouldn't use them for no good reason. Did something happen to him? He's only just left the Heavenly Star City. A voice suddenly sounded from another corner of the cave. The voice was very pleasant and enticing, and it sounded as if a young woman had just spoken. He's fine. It's just that he encountered a rather interesting person nearby and alerted us of this. He wants us to try and recruit this man to our side. The first humanoid figure replied. However, his voice was a little slow and stiff, as if he didn't speak very often. Oh, who is it? It's not often that Yuling develops an interest in anyone. The woman's heart was immediately put at ease upon learning the fact that Ling Yuling was not in danger. As such, she began to develop a curiosity toward this interesting person in question. You still remember what happened with the Heaven Void Cauldron over 100 years ago, right? Of course I do. Does this person have something to do with the cauldron? The woman asked with a hint of surprise in her voice. The man who had taken the cauldron right under the noses of Man Husey and Wan Tianming is actually the same person as the cultivator who saved Yuling all those years ago. Now, he has arrived outside our Heavenly Star City and wants to use our teleportation formation to get to the outer seas. Yuling just so happened to bump into him on his way here. the man explained. I see. If I recall correctly, this man's surname seems to be Han, and he was only a core formation cultivator back then. How is he worth recruiting? The woman was rather perplexed. You might not believe this, but Yuling suspects that this man has already become a mid-nascent soul cultivator. If that really is the case, then this man is truly an extraordinary talent, the man chuckled. The woman seemed to be very familiar with the situation in the Great Jinn, and she immediately said, when the Heaven Void Cauldron was first taken from the Heaven Void Hall, we had sent people to investigate the person who had obtained the cauldron. Didn't they determine that he was most likely a foreign cultivator who went back to where he had come from after the event? Could it be that he's a cultivator from a certain major sect in the Great Jinn? Otherwise, even if he is an extraordinary prodigy, without the support of a large sect, there's no way he would be able to become a mid-nascent soul cultivator in such a short time. Regardless of whether he's a great Jinn cultivator or not, the fact that he was able to take the Heaven Void Cauldron is a sufficient indication of his powers. If it weren't for the fact that the divine essence effused light, we cultivated rejects treasures of the 5 elements, and that Heaven Void map fragment doesn't work for late nascent soul cultivators, how could the spirit treasure have fallen into the hands of a foreign cultivator? A forlorn look appeared on the man's face. However, a wry smile appeared on the woman's face upon hearing this, and she said, full mastery of the divine essence effused light would allow us to use the power of the 5 elements, so how could we have been unable to secure a treasure of the 5 elements? We can only blame ourselves for missing out on this opportunity. After a prolonged silence, the man said in an apologetic voice, indeed, if I had known this was going to happen, I wouldn't have dragged you along with me to cultivate this divine essence effused light. This is my fault. The woman shook her calmly and said, it's not your fault. If we hadn't tried to find a shortcut, we would have never been able to progress to the deity transformation stage. As things were, if it weren't for that hiccup in the final juncture, you and I would have successfully progressed to the deity transformation stage already. At the very least, our lifespans would have been prolonged by over 1,000 years. Indeed, who would have thought that a 5-element spiritual root was required to cultivate the divine essence effused light to the final stage? If someone were to truly possess such a spirit root, they most likely wouldn't even be able to reach the foundation establishment and core formation stages, let alone the nascent soul stage. How would they be able to cultivate this divine essence effused light? It's no wonder that this cultivation art had been created so long ago, but no one has ever been able to successfully cultivate it. I was able to reach the late nascent soul stage within 500 years, and in my opinion, my cultivation aptitude is definitely not inferior to the past masters of the Star Palace. I even managed to resolve the so-called 3 insurmountable hurdles to cultivating the divine essence effused light, but never did I think that I would suffer a fate like this. The ancient cultivator who invented the divine essence effused light was clearly intentionally setting up a trap for people to fall into. I don't know what his intentions were to create such a self-contradicting cultivation art. If I had known about all this in advance, I would have never dabbled in this accursed cultivation art. The man's voice was becoming more and more worked up as he spoke, clearly indicating that he was extremely resentful toward the creator of this divine essence effused light. The woman heaved a long sigh. After a brief silence, she offered some words of consolation. So be it. Regardless of whether this cultivation art was invented as a joke by that ancient cultivator, it's a good thing that we discovered these things in the nick of time and didn't continue down that path. Otherwise, if we had continued to cultivate on the essence effused mountain, the power of the 5 elements within our bodies would have imploded and we would have died. Come to think of it, we have to thank the arch-saint of the 6 paths and Wan Sangu. If they hadn't forced us out of our seclusion early, we would have never noticed these things. HMPH, those 2 are just not worthy of a mention. If it weren't for the restriction of the essence effused mountain, I would have stormed their base and killed all of them long ago. Furthermore, this problem is not one that cannot be resolved. The man's voice became a little peculiar as he spoke. What do you mean by that? Have you really found a way to change our spirit roots? The calm woman also couldn't help but get excited upon hearing this. After a brief hesitation, the man revealed, ever since we discovered this issue, I've been reading through all types of ancient tomes in the past century, trying to find a way to overcome this problem. During the process, I discovered an ancient spiritual power that we could use. The technique can't change one's spirit root completely, but it does involve putting a pure attribute treasure through a blood sacrifice, thereby using it to replace the missing spirit root in order to gain control over the power of the 5 elements. It's that simple. The woman was shocked to hear this. Of course, There are certain conditions that must be fulfilled with regard to the sacrificial process and the treasure used, but those aren't problems to us. Most importantly, this method can only grant us control over the power of one element, but we won't be able to sacrifice a second treasure. Otherwise, our nascent souls would be unable to handle the influx of power, and our physical bodies will also crumble due to backlash. As such, unless we possess 4 attribute spirit roots in the first place, this method won't work for us, the man said in a resigned manner. I see. Then it really is completely useless to us as we only have 2 attribute spirit roots. The woman's heart sank upon hearing this. The flames of hope that had just ignited in her heart were doused once again. So be it. We should stop being so fixated on mastering the divine essence effused light. Even if there were other ways to resolve this issue, there's not enough time for us given our remaining lifespans of less than 100 years. Let's focus more on Yuling. After our combined efforts, she has finally progressed to the nascent soul stage. Once her cultivation base is fortified in a few more decades, we'll inject him with our power to forcibly take him to the mid-nascent soul stage. In that case, with his mid-nascent soul stage cultivation base, he should be ready to take over the Star Palace. Of course, we have to get rid of the Arch-Saint of the Six Paths and Wan Sangu before that. The woman's voice suddenly turned extremely cold and forbidding at the mention of these 2 enemies. It won't be a difficult task for us to get rid of those 2 as long as we put our lives on the line, the man said nonchalantly. What do we do with that cultivator with the Han surname? He possesses the heaven-void cauldron and he might be a mid-nascent soul cultivator. If you and I were to leave this world someday, he could prove to be an extremely volatile element in the scattered star seas. From the tone of Yuling's voice transmission, she seems to have a rather good impression of him. The woman was quite hesitant. He's a mid-nascent soul cultivator with exceptional aptitude. He really is worth recruiting if possible. We'll see if he wishes to join our Star Palace. If he does, then everything will be smooth sailing from there. We'll set up a restriction to take his heaven-void cauldron for Yuling to use when making a breakthrough to the mid-nascent soul stage, and we'll give him some other treasures as compensation. If he's unwilling to join us, then we'll just have to kill him. The man's voice had become extremely cold. That seems to be the only way. The woman heaved a faint sigh, but stated no objections. However, this voice-escape talisman's has already been destroyed once, so he must be aware that we're onto him. Ordinary elders won't be able to subdue him, so it looks like we'll have to make a trip in person, the man said in an indifferent voice. Even if he possesses a spirit treasure, he's just mid-nascent soul cultivator. It won't require both of us to subdue him. I can take care of him myself. On the divine essence effused mountain, he definitely won't be a match for me even if he's a late nascent soul cultivator. The woman was very confident in her own abilities. All right, that works too. You have to be careful, though, that heaven-void cauldron is not something to be scoffed at. The man didn't object to this course of action. As long as it's a treasure of the 5 elements, its power will be severely debilitated in the face of my divine essence-effused light, so what are you worried about? The woman chuckled nonchalantly. This time, the man in the cave didn't reply. He had clearly acknowledged what the woman was saying. At this moment, Han Li had already arrived at the Heavenly Star City. The city really did live up to its name as the #1 city in the scattered star seas. Han Li was able to easily secure the missing materials from the markets here. He also sold a few treasures that were useless to him, earning him a large amount of spirit stones in the process, before settling down in an inn. Seeing as Ling Yuling was already aware of the fact that he possessed the heaven-void cauldron, he naturally wasn't going to head straight to the Sacred Mountain's teleportation formation with that badge. Instead, he was going to infiltrate the Starry Sky Palace at night. If it weren't for the fact that the Heavenly Star Sages were guarding the teleportation formations, he naturally wouldn't be wary of the guards there. Of course, if this legendary pair really did appear, it would be yet to be seen whether they'd actually be able to stop him. In order to attract the least amount of attention, he intentionally chose a small inn and briefly revealed a mid-core formation stage cultivation base. As such, the Qi Condensation Inn manager was naturally extremely respectful toward Han Li, offering him the best room in his inn. That night, Han Li snuck out of the inn without anyone noticing. He could still clearly recall the location of the Starry Sky Palace, and he shot forth directly toward the place where it was situated on the massive mountain. Along the way, most of the guards he encountered were at the Qi Condensation and Foundation establishment stages. There was the occasional core formation cultivator as well, but Han Li was still able to easily sneak past them. He arrived at the 50th level of the sacred mountain in the blink of an eye, upon which the massive palace appeared before him. Letter 1D667, letter 1D65A, letter 1D65A, letter 1D500, letter 1D486, letter 1D4EB, letter 1D484, letter 1D664, letter 1D4F6. The passage of time hadn't left any signs on the palace. It was completely identical to how it had been in the past. A sense of nostalgia welled up in Han Li's heart, and just as he was about to unleash a secret technique to break through the restriction on the door, his expression suddenly changed as he abruptly disappeared. A short while later, a few indistinct humanoid figures arrived soundlessly from another direction. Their bodies were rather blurry, almost completely blending into the night. Without careful examination using one's spiritual sense, it was impossible to notice them. Who are these people? Are they from the Starfall Coalition? And Li looked on with a hint of surprise and curiosity in his heart. These human cultivators could already be considered to be quite powerful. Among them, there were 4 Foundation Establishment cultivators and 2 Core Formation cultivators, but there was also a 3rd or 4th layer Qi condensation cultivator with them. All of their faces had been obscured by a layer of gray Qi, as if they were trying to hide their appearance from prying eyes. However, the 2 Core Formation cultivators leading the way clearly consisted of a man and a woman. Han Li immediately lost interest upon making the discovery that there were no nascent soul cultivators among them. As such, he couldn't be bothered to use his spiritual sense to determine what these people looked like. All he did was stand still in midair, looking on with his arms crossed. These people approached the door to the Starry Sky Palace in the blink of an eye before stopping in unison. One of the Core Formation cultivators suddenly flipped his hand over, upon which a green formation plate appeared over his palm. He gently cast a celestial technique on it, and the formation plate began to emanate faint white light. The other Core Formation stage woman also flipped over her hand to produce a small yellow flag. She waved it through the air, and a cloud of yellow mist rapidly wafted forth from the flag, instantly enshrouding their group within. Immediately thereafter, the cloud of mist and that group of people all disappeared. Han Li faltered slightly before a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes at the sight of the yellow flag. He felt as if he had some recollection of that formation flag. He seemed to have possessed a treasure like this once upon a time, but had since given it to someone else. However, that wasn't a cause for alarm. For low-grade treasures like this, as long as one had mastered the refinement method, refining an identical one would be an easy task. Even so, Han Li had still developed an interest in that Core Formation stage woman. Their group had seemingly disappeared into thin air, but such a mediocre concealment technique was completely useless in the face of Han Li's spiritual sense. Thus, a blue light flashed through his eyes, immediately piercing through the layer of gray Qi obscuring the woman's face. A peculiar instantly appeared on Han Li's face. Right at this moment, 2 streaks of light, one azure and one yellow, shot forth from the Starry Sky Palace. A certain restriction seemed to have been triggered, and the sound of footsteps erupted from behind the palace doors, following which a white-robed cultivator slowly emerged from within. This was a tall and thin man who appeared to over 40 years of age. He wore a slightly dark expression on his face and was a Core Formation cultivator. This man was clearly the Star Palace cultivator tasked with guarding this palace. He emerged from the palace and looked around, only to discover that there was no one in the general vicinity. Upon making this discovery, his expression darkened further with a hint of displeasure on his face. Yellow light flashed, and that Core Formation stage man from earlier voluntarily showed himself. The gray Qi over his face also faded, revealing a set of graceful and refined middle-aged features. The man cupped his fist in a salute as he asked in a respectful voice, "Brother Zhang, have there been any mishaps? Will my wife and I be able to teleport away tonight?" Fellow Taoist Tian, as long as you have enough spirit stones with you, teleporting your group away is naturally just a piece of cake. All of the guardians of the teleportation formation have done the same thing at some point. Are you worried that I would go back on my word and refuse to grant you access to the teleportation formation? The Star Palace cultivator's expression eased after the man appeared, but he still spoke in a rather cold and impolite tone. "Of course not. I have absolute trust in you, Brother Zhang. It's just that my daughter really has fallen seriously ill, and we have to head out to the outer seas to find the White Yang Demon Fish's demon core to save her life. The situation is extremely urgent, and we can't afford to be delayed," the graceful man said with a smile. He then waved his hand toward a certain direction behind him. A spluttering sound was heard, following which a ball of yellow mist dissipated, revealing the remaining members of the group. The Foundation establishment cultivators had all revealed their faces, leaving only the female core formation cultivator and a thin and frail female chi condensation cultivator with their faces still concealed under gray chi. "This must be your wife. I've heard much about you, Moon Maiden." The Star Palace cultivator completely ignored the other Foundation establishment cultivators as his attention was drawn to the female core formation cultivator. His gaze scanned across her face several times, and he even put on a rare smile for her. "Thank you for doing this, fellow Taoist Zhang. I am forever grateful to you." The female cultivator's voice was very gentle and delicate, yet she spoke in a manner that was neither haughty nor humble. "It's a shame that Moon Maiden refuses to show your face here. I must say, I'm a little disappointed. Come with me." The Star Palace cultivator chuckled as a slightly wistful look appeared on his face. However, he then immediately turned and strode into the palace. The graceful man exchanged a glance with that female core formation cultivator, before also entering the palace with the chi condensation stage woman sandwiched between them. The 4 Foundation establishment cultivators were clearly their disciples, and they also hurriedly rushed in pursuit of their masters. Of course, none of the cultivators noticed that an azure light suddenly flashed outside the palace again. In the instant right before the restriction was reactivated, a faint figure, whom they were completely unable to detect with their cultivation bases, strode in along with them. The figure moved in a completely soundless and stealthy manner, as if he were nothing more than a wisp of smoke. After passing through a convoluted system of corridors, everyone arrived in a hall, within which were many teleportation formations. There was an elderly man with a face as tender as that of an infant waiting inside. Once the group of people walked in, a cold light flashed through the elderly man's eyes before instantly receding again. "That's everyone, right? 7 people is just the right number for a single batch," the elderly man remarked indifferently. "Indeed, they are the fellow Taoists wishing to be teleported away this time. Fellow Taoist Tian, which island would you like to travel to?" The Star Palace cultivator answered the elderly man's question first, before turning to inquire the man behind him. "Go to Silver Shark Island. Due to the fact that a high-grade min was discovered there, most of the cultivators in the outer seas have gone to that island. Perhaps we'll be able to find a white yang demon fish's demon core there," the man replied after a brief hesitation. At the same time, his gaze swept over the row of teleportation formations before settling on one of the formations. "Brother Huang, deactivate the restriction on that teleportation formation. Fellow Taoist Tian, it's time for you to pay up," the Star Palace cultivator said to the graceful man expressionlessly. "Of course." After the elderly man cast a few celestial techniques to withdraw the barrier of white light around the teleportation formation, the graceful man's heart danced with elation. He immediately pulled off a storage pouch hanging from his waist and tossed it to the Star Palace cultivator. The latter caught the pouch and scanned through its contents with his spiritual sense, upon which a content expression appeared on his face. "The amount is just right. Here, these are you teleportation talismans." After verifying the number of spirit stones in the storage pouch, the Star Palace cultivator didn't delay any further as he pulled out 7 teleportation talismans. The graceful man accepted the teleportation talismans before distributing one each to everyone in his group. They were then led by the Star Palace cultivator toward the teleportation formation that his gaze had rested on before. This teleportation formation was already shimmering with faint white light, and everything appeared to be normal. "You sure have some guts. How dare you teleport people away to the outer seas behind my back? Are you not afraid that the enforcement hall will put you through the torture of the lightning whips?" All of a sudden, an enticing female voice erupted. The voice wasn't very loud, but it exploded like claps of thunder in the hearts of all of the cultivators present. Star Palace cultivator and the elderly man's faces immediately turned deathly pale. The graceful man and the female core formation cultivator were momentarily stunned before abruptly turning around. Light erupted from their bodies, wrapping up the frail female chi condensation cultivator in a cocoon of light before the two of them transformed into streaks of light, one red and one blue, as they hurtled directly toward the teleportation formation. A cold harumph rang out. A vibrant streak of light suddenly flew through the air from one corner of the hall, appearing in front of the formation in the blink of an eye. Spiritual light swept through the air, swatting the blue and red streaks of light aside with ease. The 2 streaks of light were sent flying for 70 to 80 feet before dissipating, revealing the disheveled figures of the graceful man and the female core formation cultivator. Both of them had also turned deathly pale, and they opened their mouths in unison to throw up mouthfuls of blood essence. In contrast, the chi condensation stage woman that they strove to protect was completely unscathed. At this moment, the gray chi obscuring the faces of the two women disappeared at the same time, revealing their true features. Female core formation cultivator appeared to be around 25 or 26 years of age with skin as fair and fine as warm jade. She was an exquisite beauty. The chi condensation stage woman beside her appeared to only be around 15 to 16 years of age with a sickly yellow pallor and an extremely thin figure. However, upon closer inspection, one could see that her features bore a startling resemblance to those of the female core formation cultivator. Furthermore, her eyes were as clear as water, and even in such a dire situation, there wasn't much panic or alarm on her face. "We pay our respects to the palace master." The two-star palace cultivators were completely petrified after seeing that streak of light, and they immediately fell to their knees. The two core formation cultivators glanced at each other upon hearing that, and both of them could see their own shock mirrored in one another's eyes. They were initially holding on to some hope that they would be able to escape from this woman, but that hope had been completely dashed. They stood rooted to the spot, unable to even muster up the courage to flee. Right at this moment, light flashed in the corner as a lithe and graceful figure emerged before hovering toward the center of the hall. This was a white-robed woman, wearing a white scarf that obscured half of her face. Her eyes were as bright as stars, and her brows were thin and long. This was clearly another stunning beauty. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D6AT, letter 1D5F2, letter 1D604, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D698, letter 1D696. However, this woman didn't even look at the cultivators gathered around the teleportation formation. Instead, she turned her attention toward the entrance of the hall and said, "Fellow Taoist Han, why are you sneaking around in the presence of these juniors? Would you be so kind as to reveal yourself and have a chat with me?" Her words immediately sent waves of shock surging through the hearts of the other cultivators present, and they all turned toward the direction she was facing in unison. In their eyes, there was nothing but empty space there. How could there possibly be anyone there? Just as everyone was caught in a state of suspicion and bewilderment, a gentle chuckle was suddenly heard from that spot. "I didn't think that I would encounter one of the heavenly star sages here. You didn't come here just to meet me, did you?" As soon as that voice fell, azure light flashed, and an azure-robed cultivator emerged from thin air. He had his hands clasped behind his back and was looking at the woman before him with a hint of a smile on his face. This man was none other than Han Li. The woman scanned over Han Li's body with her spiritual sense, upon which her expression changed drastically. A wave of incredulity swept through her bright eyes as she exclaimed, "Late nascent soul stage." This woman was naturally the woman in the cave of the sacred mountain. Everyone else in the hall was flabbergasted to hear the words, "Late nascent soul stage." Half of them were core formation cultivators, but encountering a nascent soul cultivator was still a rare opportunity for them, and encountering a late nascent soul cultivator was something that almost never happened. However, not only had one of the heavenly star sages just revealed herself to them, another unknown late nascent soul cultivator had also appeared. This made everyone feel as if they were stuck in a dream. Among those cultivators, the core formation stage woman referred to as Moon Maiden was more stunned than everyone else to see Han Li. Her mouth gaped open in shock, and when she heard that Han Li had become a late nascent soul cultivator, she was completely rooted to the spot in astonishment. Under normal circumstances, her reaction would have drawn the attention of the people beside her. However, all of the cultivators were completely focused on these two late nascent soul cultivators, so no one had the spare mental capacity to pay any heed to her reaction. Funnily enough, the young chi condensation stage woman was the first and only one to notice her stunned expression. Due to the fact that her cultivation base was pitifully low, the core formation and nascent soul stages were too far beyond her to evoke any reaction within her. After taking in the core formation stage woman's reaction, she couldn't help but take a curious glance at Han Li. "Are you really Han Li?" The heavenly star sage's calm and collected expression had already faded and was replaced by a particularly grave one. "Do you think you were waiting for the wrong person this entire time?" Han Li didn't give a direct reply. Instead, a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the woman before him. The masked woman was looking right back at Han Li without showing any weakness, but there were waves of shock surging through her heart. She had thought that Han Li would be easy prey for her to capture, only to discover that he was far more powerful than he anticipated. As such, she was starting to become rather hesitant. With the assistance of the divine essence-effused light and the divine essence-effused mountain, she was confident that she would have at least a 70% chance of victory if a battle were to ensue. However, it would be close to impossible for her to kill or capture Han Li on her own. If she were to do so, there was a good chance that Han Li would be able to escape, and thereafter, the Star Palace would have earned itself a late nascent soul stage enemy. Thus, even as one of the heavenly star sages, she didn't dare to act rashly in this situation. As such, both Han Li and the woman fell silent. The entire palace was immediately enshrouded in a suffocating atmosphere that struck one with a sense of asphyxiation. All of a sudden, Han Li's expression darkened as he raised his hand and feigned a grabbing motion. Spiritual light immediately flashed as a large azure hand emerged. The hand flew through the air like lightning, plucking a streak of fiery light out of thin air before clamping it firmly within its palm. The masked woman raised her eyebrows upon seeing this, and a hint of surprise flashed through her eyes. "I'd advise you not to go sending out voice transmission talismans, fellow Taoist. I don't want to be attacked by two cultivators of the same cultivation base as mine at the same time. As far as I'm aware, I haven't done anything to offend the Star Palace, so why do you harbor so much enmity toward me?" Henley asked in a cold voice. At the same time, a layer of azure flame surfaced along the large azure hand, instantly reducing the streak of fiery light into nothingness. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, fellow Taoist Han. I have no intention of harming you. I'm merely attempting to express my gratitude toward you for saving my daughter all those years ago." The masked woman fell silent for a moment before a smile suddenly appeared on her face. The heavy atmosphere within the palace was suddenly relieved with her words. "Daughter, could it be that fellow Taoist Ling is?" Han Li faltered slightly before an enlightened look appeared on his face. His expression also eased in response. He knew that this woman's true intention clearly wasn't to express gratitude to him, but he decided to defuse the situation by playing along with her lies. And Li didn't consider it to be a problem to engage a late-nascent soul cultivator in battle. After all, he had slain late-nascent soul cultivators in the past, and now that he had progressed to that cultivation base himself, he was far more powerful than he once was. However, at the same time, he was not interested in making enemies everywhere he went. Furthermore, he was currently situated in the heavenly star city, and was naturally rather wary of the divine essence-effused light. "It seems you've already guessed it. Yuling is our only daughter, and if it weren't for your help all those years ago, she would have most likely perished already. My Tao companion and I have always been very grateful toward you," the masked woman said in a warm voice. "No wonder fellow Taoist Ling's aptitude is so exceptional. It makes sense that she's the daughter of the heavenly star sages." Han Li smiled in response. "Surely you jest, brother Han. In terms of cultivation aptitude, no one is a match for you. You've progressed from the core formation stage to the late nascent soul stage in less than 200 years. That's simply unheard of. No one has been able to cultivate at such a phenomenal rate in the history of the human world. Yuling cannot compare to you." The masked woman chuckled as she shook her head. She was very stunned by Han Li's insane rate of progression, and was trying to indirectly prompt him to reveal how he had made such extraordinary strides. Han Li could naturally read between the lines and sense the indirect questions being posed, but he merely gave an ambiguous smile and didn't speak any further on this topic. "I've heard a lot about the two heavenly star sages, and I would love to have a good chat with you, but I still have important matters to attend to, so I'm afraid I can't stay any longer. I would like to use the Star Palace's teleportation formation. You don't mind, do you?" And Li glanced at the teleportation formation before turning back to appraise the masked woman. "Of course not. I have a guest elder badge here that you can take if you'd like. I know that with your status, you wouldn't actually want to become a guest elder at the Star Palace. This is just something that I'm lending to you on behalf of my Tao companion and myself. With this badge, you'll be able to summon and use all of the resources of the Star Palace in the outer seas. Please accept it as a gesture of our gratitude." The masked woman immediately accepted Han Li's request and pulled out a shiny golden badge from a storage pouch hanging from her waist, which she tossed toward him. Han Li was rather surprised by this gesture, and he reflexively caught that golden badge being tossed at him. He examined the badge with a cursory glance before replying, "Thank you for your hospitality." After a brief hesitation, Han Li placed the badge into his storage pouch. A hint of elation flashed through the masked woman's eyes upon seeing him accept the guest elder badge. She then took this opportunity to say, "When you return from the outer seas, my Tao companion and I want to extend a formal invitation for you to come join us at our cultivation spot and discuss some experiences on our paths to the deity transformation stage. Would you be interested in that?" Deity transformation stage. I've only just progressed to the late nascent soul stage, and I would love to exchange cultivation experiences with cultivators of the same level, but my top priority is to fortify my cultivation base for now. However, if I do get the chance, I would visit you and your Tao companion for sure. Han Li contemplated momentarily before turning down her invitation with an apologetic expression. Late nascent soul cultivators were extremely rare in the human world, and to be able to hold a discussion with such cultivators was indeed a rare opportunity. However, he didn't want to plunge himself into a perilous situation for this opportunity. With his current power level, he was confident that he would be able to take on several late nascent soul cultivators at once and emerge from the battle unscathed. However, that didn't mean that there was nothing in the human world that could pose a threat to him, aside from deity transformation cultivators. If he weren't careful, he could be trapped in an ancient restriction, so some kind of powerful large-scale formation spell. If he were to be attacked by late nascent stage cultivators in that situation, the outcome may not fall in his favor. Thus, he immediately decided to euphemistically turn down her invitation to visit their cultivation spot. A hint of disappointment appeared on the masked woman's face upon hearing this. As for whether she actually harbored ulterior motives in the invitation that she had extended to Han Li, even she couldn't be sure of that herself. However, seeing as Han Li had turned her down, she was naturally not going to force the issue. Instead, she merely moved on to other conversation topics and continued to chat amicably with him. Han Li gave a few polite responses before taking his leave. The masked woman didn't try to stop him. Instead, she stepped away to the side, allowing him access to the teleportation formation. At the same time, she drifted away even further into the distance as a gesture of reassurance to Han Li, indicating that she wasn't going to disrupt his teleportation. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face, and he paid this no heed as he strode on ahead. The two-star palace cultivators hurriedly stepped aside in a respectful manner, granting Han Li free passage to the teleportation formation. However, as they did so, the core formation stage couple and their disciples were revealed to him. The graceful man didn't dare to say anything either, and he immediately tried to drag his daughter away to get out of Han Li's path. However, to his surprise, the core formation stage woman with whom he had been happily married for over 100 years suddenly made her way over to Han Li before extending a respectful bow. When Siyu pays her respects to Senior Han, "Congratulations on progressing to the late nascent soul stage, Senior. If it weren't for your help all those years ago, I wouldn't be standing here today." This core formation stage cultivator was none other than the woman who had almost become Han Li's servant in the outer star seas, when Siyu. "Siyu, you recognize this, Senior?" The graceful man was rather flabbergasted. Han Li turned toward the woman and said calmly, "Long time no see. I see you've also reached the core formation stage. Looks like you haven't been slacking off with your cultivation. Otherwise, with your aptitude, it would have been slightly difficult for you to reach this stage. It's all thanks to the pills you left for me, Senior. Otherwise, I would have never reached the core formation stage," when Siyu replied in a respectful manner. "Your father and I are old acquaintances, so it was only right for me to help you out. You don't need to thank me. You look like you're in a hurry to get to the outer seas as well. Let's go together. This woman is an acquaintance of mine. You wouldn't mind if I took these people with me to the outer seas, would you?" Han Li turned and asked the masked woman. "Of course not. Feel free to take them with you," the masked woman replied without any hesitation. "You have my thanks." Han Li nodded and didn't say anything further to Wen Siyu. Instead, he merely raised a leg and somehow appeared in the teleportation formation after taking just a single step. He had clearly just employed the distance minimization technique that only late nascent soul cultivators were capable of unleashing. Wen Siyu and the others were all startled to see this before turning to Han Li with awe and veneration in their eyes. Only the thin and frail young woman's eyes lit up with curiosity as she looked at Han Li. Han Li cast a celestial technique toward the edge of the formation before pulling out his greater teleportation medallion. Just as white light began to glow within the formation, he turned to the masked woman with a smile and asked, "By the way, I don't seem to have learned your name yet. Would you be so kind as to disclose it to me?" "My name is Wen Qing." The masked woman was slightly taken aback by this question initially, but she still replied with a smile. Right in this instant, Han Li and the others disappeared amid the white light, and it was unknown whether he had heard her response or not. The smile on the masked woman's face immediately disappeared. She said in a frosty voice, "For granting them access to the teleportation formations, both of you will receive 20 lightning whiplashes each as a punishment. If you dare to do this again, I won't be so kind. Thank you for sparing our lives, Palace Master. We definitely won't ever do it again." The two petrified Star Palace cultivators were both horrified and elated upon hearing the punishment dictated by the woman. They were elated as the punishment was a lot less severe than they had thought it would be, but also horrified in that 20 lightning whiplashes would most likely make them bedridden for an entire month. After delivering this verdict, a flash of light erupted from the masked woman's body, and she disappeared on the spot. After the masked woman left the Starry Sky Palace, the two Star Palace cultivators heaved a collective sigh of relief. The younger of the two glanced at Wen Xiu and the others, and a hint of anger flashed through his eyes. If it weren't for these people, they wouldn't have been caught red-handed and have to suffer the torment of the lightning whips. The Star Palace cultivator put on a stern expression and was just about to hurl some insults at the group to vent his frustration, when the elderly man suddenly turned to Wen Xiu with a respectful look and said, "You sure are fortunate to have been able to make Senior Han's acquaintance. This is an extremely rare opportunity. With Senior Han's guidance, you'll be able to easily progress to the nascent soul stage in the future." The elderly man's cold demeanor toward Wen Xiu and the others had completely disappeared. The other Star Palace cultivator was initially stunned by this turn of events, but he was then enlightened by the elderly man's words. He immediately swallowed the insults that he was about to hurl before plastering a smile across his face. In his fit of rage and frustration, he had forgotten that these people had a connection to a late nascent soul cultivator. They were not people that measly core formation cultivators like them could mess with. Indeed, Brother Han is right. Perhaps we'll be counting on you too for assistance in certain areas in the future, fellow Taoists. Here are your soul stones. We'll cover your teleportation costs this time. The Star Palace cultivator plucked the storage pouch that was full of soul stones off his waist and offered it up to the core formation stage couple. Even though his heart was throbbing with pain, he still forced an enthusiastic and hospitable look onto his face. The graceful man took a glance at the storage pouch and hesitated momentarily. However, Wen Xiu decided to turn them down with a warm smile. "My Tao companion and I are extremely grateful to you too that you're willing to teleport us to the outer seas. How could we take back our soul stones? Please accept them as repayment for your kindness. I'm in a bit of hurry to catch up to Senior Han, so I hope you can teleport us over as quickly as possible. Of course, I'll change the soul stones and you'll be able to teleport immediately." The Star Palace cultivator could tell that Wen Xiu really didn't want to take back the soul stones, so he could only put them away again in a sheepish manner. His body then flashed over to the teleportation formation, where he leaned down and began to change the soul stones that had just been used for the previous bout of teleportation. Meanwhile, the elderly man was still conversing with Wen Xiu and her Tao companion, trying to indirectly dig up more information about Han Li. The graceful man knew absolutely nothing, so he couldn't provide any answers. As for Wen Xiu, she merely smiled and provided ambiguous replies, clearly reluctant to disclose any information. A short while later, the soul stones on the teleportation formation had been swapped over. Wen Xiu really was in a hurry to catch up to Han Li, so she could only turn down the two Star Palace cultivators' further attempts to make converse Jiang, plastering the teleportation talisman onto her body before leading everyone else into the formation. White light flashed again as all 7 of them disappeared. The two Star Palace cultivators glanced at one another and sighed in unison before wry smiles appeared on their faces. On the other end of the teleportation formation, within a stone chamber over around 100 feet in size, Wen Xiu and her group emerged amid a burst of white light. Moments later, the 7 of them recovered from the bouts of dizziness that always struck following teleportation. Wen Xiu hurriedly looked around, upon which her heart immediately sank. The stone chamber was completely empty, thus devoid of Han Li's presence. "Wait here for me. I'm going to see if Senior Han is still nearby," Wen Xiu hurriedly instructed before rushing out the stone door without waiting for a reply from her Tao companion. The graceful man wanted to say something, but swallowed his words in the end after a brief hesitation. However, his brows were slightly furrowed as he looked on at Wen Siyu's departing figure. Wen Siyu walked out of the stone chamber, and her eyes immediately lit up. The chamber was situated on a broad stone platform, and the platform was, in turn, located on the peak of a steep mountain. The platform was surrounded entirely by sheer cliff faces that no mortal would have been able to climb up. However, the cause for her elation was that Han Li was standing in a corner of the stone platform, conversing with a cultivator in Star Palace robes. He stood with his hands behind his back and was speaking in a leisurely manner. The burly and menacing mid-core formation cultivator was like an obedient lamb in the face of Han Li, nodding and bowing incessantly while providing answers to Han Li's questions with a fearful expression. It appeared that this man was Star Palace cultivator, guarding the teleportation formations on this end. Wen Siyu took a moment to compose herself, but she didn't immediately approach Han Li. Instead, she waited in silence as Han Li conversed with that Star Palace cultivator. After a while, Han Li waved a hand and seemed to have asked all of the questions that he had. The burly man extended a deep respectful bow before striding toward the stone chamber. Only then did Wen Siyu make her way over to Han Li. "Thank you for your help back there, Senior Han. If it weren't for you, not only would we have been unable to make it to the outer seas, we could have been in deep trouble as well," Wen Siyu said with a respectful bow. Han Li wore a calm expression as he glanced at the woman and asked, "Don't mention it. You were only caught because of me, so it was only right for me to lend you a hand. Your trip here seems to be rather urgent. Is there some important matter you have to attend to? You have helped me a lot already, and I should be content with the assistance I've received, but please forgive me for being greedy. My daughter is severely ill and could die at any moment. Please lend me your assistance again, Senior." Wen Siyu began to shed tears as she spoke, and it was quite clear that she really was extremely concerned for her daughter. "That poisoned little girl is your daughter." A flash of light appeared in Han Li's eyes, but his expression still remained calm and collected. "She is. You truly have an exceptional eye to be able to identify the cause of my daughter's illness, Senior Han." Wen Siyu turned to Han Li with a hopeful expression upon hearing Han Li's words. "I overheard some parts of your conversation already. Haven't you already found a way to cure the poison? Why are you still coming to me?" Han Li asked. "Indeed, my Tao companion and I received guidance from a great man, telling us that the demon core of the white yang demon fish could be used to create a pill that would cure this poison. However, this pill can't completely eradicate the poison. Even if it can temporarily save my daughter's life, her physique would be ruined and her cultivation path would be as good as over. You're a late nascent soul great cultivator, Senior, so you must have a better solution. Please help us, Senior," Wen Siyu urgently explained. "I see." Han Li didn't immediately agree to help her. He merely fell silent as a contemplative look appeared on his face. Wen Siyu's heart was extremely uneasy, but she didn't dare to rush Han Li for an answer. She could only stare up Han Li with a pitiable, beseeching look on her face. Han Li looked up at the dazzling sun in the sky, then down at Wen Siyu's gorgeous features, and to her surprise he said, "When did Brother Wen pass away?" Wen Siyu was slightly taken aback to hear this, but a dejected look then appeared on her face as she replied, "When I returned to the inner seas all those years ago, Father had already disappeared. I've searched for him for several decades, but I'm still yet to find any leads. Unless Father has reached the core formation stage, he has most likely already left his world. The path of cultivation is always fraught with peril. No one knows which step they'll be able to reach. If you were a stranger requesting for my assistance, then I would most likely ignore you. However, you've encountered me on more than one occasion, so it appears we have affinity with one another. Seeing as you're the door of my past acquaintance and I still have some time on my hands, I'll take a look at your daughter." Han Li finally agreed with a nod. "Thank you for your kindness, Senryo." Wen Siyu was overjoyed to hear this and was about to fall to her knees in gratitude. "This is not a place to be administering treatment. I'll wait for you in the inn in that small tuan at the foot of the mountain. Come on over when you and your companions are ready." Han Li swept a sleeve through the air, and an invisible force carried Wen Siyu's body, making her unable to fall to her knees as she intended. An azure light then flashed around him, and he shot forth down the mountain as a streak of azure light. Wen Siyu faltered momentarily, before rushing toward the stone chamber with an elated expression. Moments later, the seven of them all rushed toward the direction that Han Li had disappeared in. That Han brat has already reached the late nascent soul stage. In the inner star seas countless kilometers away, Within the cave on the Heavenly Star City's sacred mountain, an incredulous male voice rang out, causing the entire cave to tremor. The man who had spoken was none other than one of the Heavenly Star Sages. He has. I was also in disbelief, but I used my spiritual sense to verify his cultivation base several times, so there's no mistaking it. A female voice sounded in reply. The woman named Wen Qing had already taken off her scarf, revealing a set of beautiful yet slightly pale features, and she sat down on a translucent and glittering jade stone platform in the cave. That means his cultivation aptitude is even superior to yours and mine. The man seemed to have recovered slightly from his initial astonishment. That does appear to be the case. As far as I know, he wasn't 200 years old yet when he disappeared. His cultivation progress is unmatched by any of the past masters of the Star Palace. You and I only managed to just barely reach the late nascent soul stage at about 500 years of age. When Qing heaved a forlorn sigh. She had thought that she was a superb cultivation prodigy, only to find that she was merely a frog sitting in a well, and the stark contrast struck her with a sense of loss and sorrow. If that's the case, even if he's only just advanced to the late nascent soul stage, with the heaven void cauldron on his side, he should be able to match either one of us in battle. No wonder you changed your mind and let him go in the end. What's your first impression after talking to him? The man asked with furrowed brows. First impression, he's very cautious and bold. No, not bold. Instead, he's... When Qing's brows suddenly furrowed as an indecisive light flashed through her eyes. Is he difficult to describe? The man asked. Letter 1D557, letter 1D42B, letter 1D41E, letter 1D556, letter 1D568, letter 1D41E, letter 1D41C, letter 1D5FC, letter 1D696. After a brief hesitation, when Qing replied, No, it's not that. It's just that thinking back now, I've discovered something a little suspicious. Suspicious? Yes. Now that I think about it, he clearly knew that I was one of the Heavenly Star Sages and that he was situated in the Heavenly Star City, but he showed no fear or concern about his situation. Even with the Heaven Void Cauldron, he shouldn't have been that confident. Also, when I was facing him, I was struck by this indescribable sense of fear, as if he's an extremely fearsome person. I haven't had such a feeling in a very long time, when Qing mused as she recalled the situation. You cultivated the spirit premonition art, so your instincts are correct the vast majority of the time. That means that he really must be fearsome in some way. The man's voice had also become quite grave. Perhaps he really is as fearsome as my instinctive impression of him suggested. Otherwise, how could he have been so calm and collected in my presence? When Qing speculated. If that's the case, then the situation really is quite troublesome. We won't be able to kill him easily, so all we can do is try to recruit him with all our might. But with his immense power, if he were to join the Star Palace, how is Yuling going to be able to control him? Once one of us passes away, he could easily turn on us and take over the entire Star Palace. A hint of killing intent was seeping out of the man's voice. So what you're saying is, we still have to get rid of him. But what if this man is too powerful for us to kill and he ends up escaping? We'll be making an fearsome enemy for Yuling. The consequences of that will be catastrophic. When Qing was a little hesitant. HMPH, if we don't think of a way to get rid of this man, he's going to stir up the entire scattered Star Sea sooner or later. We have no chance of making any further advancements on our cultivation paths, but we can't let the Star Palace fall by our hands. People who we can't recruit to our side must be killed. Even if it's going to be quite risky, we still have to try nonetheless. The man harumphed coldly without any hesitation. You do have a point, but this is an extremely important matter. In my opinion, it's best to think carefully before we act. When Qing shook her head, clearly in disagreement with the proposed course of action. Are you really that wary of him? If we join forces and use the divine essence-effused mountain, there's no way he'd be able to escape, the man declared in a haughty manner. If we join forces and use the divine essence-effused mountain, we do indeed have a 70 to 80% chance of killing him. However, he's a very cautious man and most likely wouldn't come to visit our sacred mountain voluntarily. Furthermore, the divine essence-effused mountain is extremely useful in defense, but very maladroit when used to attack and pursue enemies. If we really want to catch him off guard, we'd have to use the divine essence-fused mountain to enshroud the entire starry sky palace in the exact instant that he teleports back from the outer seas. Only then can we ensure that he won't be able to escape. Otherwise, if he tries to get away, it'll be very difficult for us to kill him, the woman mused. I'm well aware of that. I heard you gave him a guest elder badge, right? That's a great idea. If he uses the badge, we'll be able to track his location and get a rough estimate of when he'll return. In that case, it won't be impossible to set up an ambush at the Starry Sky Palace, the man said in a sinister voice. Wen Qing's brows furrowed and she didn't give a reply. Instead, she suddenly changed the topic and said something that was very surprising to the man. Almost all of the past masters of the Star Palace have consisted of a couple. Yuling is already an early nascent soul cultivator, yet she still doesn't have a Dao companion yet. Only by using the Star Palace's secret pair cultivation technique will she have a high success rate when progressing to the late nascent soul stage. Also, as long as one of the cultivators in the couple is a late nascent soul cultivator, the Star Palace will remain a dominant force in the scattered star seas. That was how we were able to become the masters of the Star Palace. There are only 2 or 3 nascent soul cultivators in the Star Palace of a similar age to Yuling, and she doesn't seem to have developed an interest in any of them. That's rather troublesome. What do you think of that hand brat? If he agrees to marry Yuling, how about we hand over the Star Palace to him? In that case, it would be the same as handing the Star Palace over to Yuling. Also, with his astonishing rate of progression, there's a good chance that he'll be able to reach the deity transformation stage. Under his protection, Yuling could also reach that level someday. Wen Qing offered her alternative. Have him become Yuling's Dao companion. That's a good idea. However, this man is already a late nascent soul cultivator at such a young age, so there's a good chance that he already has a Dao companion, and he could even have a large number of concubines already. The man was still rather hesitant. So what even if that is the case? How can any of them compare to Yuling? We're handing over the Star Palace to him as a dowry. It should be apparent to him who's more important. In the worst-case scenario, he'll just have to abandon his concubines or make them his servants instead. This is not an uncommon occurrence in our cultivation world, Wen Qing replied with an indifferent smile. The man nodded before saying in a solemn voice, "All right, we'll do as you say then. But if he turns us down, we'll have to join forces to get rid of him." A peculiar look suddenly appeared in Wen Qing's eyes as a cold smile surfaced on her face. "Even if he doesn't agree, he won't be able to do anything to us. I have a plan that will make him become his worst enemy. When that time comes, he's going to slowly destroy himself and he won't be able to even think about touching our Star Palace." "How are you going to do that? Make sure it doesn't backfire on us." The fact that this man was able to progress to the late nascent soul stage shows that he won't be easy to swindle. The man was rather surprised to hear this. Wen Qing chuckled before her lips tremored, transmitting her voice to the man rather than speaking directly to him. "You want to do that? No, I absolutely won't agree to this." After listening for only a short while, a shocked look abruptly appeared on the man's face before his expression darkened. However, Wen Qing paid him no heed and continued to transmit her voice to him. After listening for a while longer, the anger on the man's face gradually disappeared. When Wen Qing finally concluded her voice transmission, the man fell into deep thought with his narrowed in contemplation. Wen Qing waited patiently for him, in silence with a smile on her face. After a long which, a decisive look appeared on the man's face as he said, "We'll do as you say. If we don't succeed, then we'll employ other methods. In any case, we have to get rid of the arch-saint of the Six Paths, Wan Sangu, and any other people who could pose a threat to our Star Palace. Only then will we be able to hand over the Star Palace to Yuling. Of course, both of us still have over 100 years left of our lifespans. That's more than enough to take care of these matters, so we don't have to rush things. As long as he wants to progress to the deity transformation stage, there's no way he won't fall for this trap." The woman seemed to be very confident in her own plan. Just as the heavenly star sages concluded their discussion in the cave on the sacred mountain, Han Li was sitting in a peaceful wooden cabin on the Silver Shark Island. He was holding onto the wrist of a thin and frail young woman in his hand, and a wisp of his spiritual power was roaming through her body, searching for something. This was none other than Wen Siyu's daughter, a young woman by the name of Tian Kinner. She was seated on a wooden bed with her legs folded in front of her, and her face was slightly flushed as she raised her exposed arm for Han Li's examination. As for Han Li himself, he sat by the edge of the bed with no expression on his face. Nearby, Wen Siyu and the graceful man were standing completely still, not even daring to breathe too loudly as they stared at the young woman with concern in their eyes. Meanwhile, their 4 Foundation establishment stage disciples were standing guard outside to prevent anyone from disrupting the diagnosis process. Han Li finally released Tian Kinner's wrist as he said, "The situation is indeed a little troublesome. This poison is constantly engulfing the spiritual power within her body, and it's rushing through her meridians in an extremely unpredictable manner. It's no wonder neither of you were able to do anything about this. You must have fed her a lot of pills, right? Otherwise, she would have perished a long time ago. Even so, pills are only a temporary fix, and the spiritual power they offer will only provide more fuel for the poison. If things continue like this, she'll be dead in 3 months unless the poison is cured. Letter 1D68F, letter 1D563, letter 1D556, letter 1D680, letter 1D680, letter 1D680, letter 1D554, letter 1D428, letter 1D55E. The couple was stunned to hear this, and the graceful man asked in a trembling voice, "Senior Han, even you're unable to eradicate this poison." "I only said the situation was a little troublesome. When did I ever say I couldn't get rid of this poison?" Han Li glanced at the man and asked coldly. "Apologies for my rudeness. Please forgive me, Senior." Only then did the man recall that Han Li was a great cultivator and was not someone he could voice his doubts against. Upon arriving at this realization, a sheen of cold sweat immediately surfaced on his forehead. Han Li didn't say anything else. He turned toward the young woman sitting on the bed, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes. The young woman had been completely silent ever since she entered the room. Her cheeks had been slightly flushed when he had grabbed onto her wrist, but aside from that, she was remarkably calm. This was not the reaction he expected from a normal person. Even most cultivators couldn't pay so little heed to whether they lived or died as she did. What was even more surprising to Han Li was that he was struck by an indescribable sense of familiarity whenever he looked at her. This feeling was both familiar yet rather foreign, making him wonder if it were just a figment of his imagination. If it weren't for that fact that he had recently progressed to the late nascent soul stage, thereby significantly increasing the sensitivity of his spiritual sense, he most likely wouldn't even have been able to detect that ambiguous feeling. As for the poison that this young woman was afflicted by, taking care of it was a simple task to him. Han Li was very perplexed, and he fell into deep thought as he stared the young woman before him. Wen Xiyu and her Dao companion were both also rather puzzled to see this, but they merely looked at one another and didn't dare to disrupt Han Li with their words. All of a sudden, Han Li shuddered as a thought occurred to him. An extremely peculiar look appeared in his eyes as he appraised this Tian Kinner again. "Are you well versed in formation spells?" Much to their surprise, Han Li asked a question that was completely unrelated to the poison that Tian Kinner had been afflicted by. The young woman turned to Han Li with astonishment in her eyes upon hearing this, as did Wen Xiyu and her Dao companion. "Senior Han, how did you know that my daughter is well versed in formation spells?" Wen Xiyu couldn't help but ask. "There was an acquaintance of mine who was also quite proficient in formation spells, and she bore some resemblance to your daughter," Han Li replied as he quickly composed himself. At the same time, a lithe and graceful figure surfaced in his mind. This lithe and graceful figure was of none other than Xin Ryan, the fiery woman whom he had met countless years ago. The two of them were actually completely different in physical appearance, but their dispositions were astonishingly similar. Could it just be a coincidence? Han Li had an unfathomable premonition that this was not the case. A light flashed through his eyes as he suddenly grabbed onto the young woman's hand before flipping it over to reveal her palm. There was a small red birthmark at the center of her palm, and it was as vibrant as fresh blood. "Impossible!" Han Li exclaimed with an astonished expression. Han Li's outburst gave Wen Xiyu and her Dao companion a massive fright. Before they had a chance to inquire about the situation, a burst of light suddenly flashed from Han Li's fingertip as he tapped it toward the red birthmark on the young woman's palm. A small ball of azure light then immediately disappeared into her palm. Wen Xiyu and her Dao companion had no idea what was going on, but they didn't dare to disrupt what Han Li was doing. An incredible scene then ensued. After the azure light disappeared, the red birthmark became even more vibrant in color before beginning to elongate. Gradually, it transformed into a crimson dragon pattern that surfaced on the center of her palm. The dragon was extremely vivid and lifelike, as if it were an actual living creature. "I knew it," Han Li murmured to himself. He turned to appraise Tian Kinner again, and his expression became even more peculiar. Wen Xiyu's heart immediately clenched up with concern upon seeing this, and she asked, "Senior Han is my daughter." Han Li exhaled and asked, "It's all right, I've discovered why your daughter's condition is so strange. I heard from your conversation earlier that she was bitten by an unknown venomous insect before falling ill, right?" Wen-Siyu's heart stirred, and she hurriedly replied, "That's right, our daughter was indeed afflicted by a venomous insect. However, we managed to get the insect to bite us as well, and its venom was indeed rather difficult to eradicate, but definitely not as difficult as in our daughter's case." Li pointed at the red dragon pattern on the center of the young woman's palm and said, "Hee, that's only natural. The venom is only a red herring, leading you to believe that it's the root cause for your daughter's condition when in reality, the thing that's actually posing a threat to her life is her dragon cry physique. She's a female cultivator with a special physique unique to men. Furthermore, the insect most likely possessed extremely potent yang-type venom as well, and the combination of those two factors culminated in her current condition. The venom is merely a catalyst. Even without it, her vitality will gradually fade and she won't live past 40. Dragon cry physique? That's impossible. My Dao companion and I checked our daughter thoroughly after she was born, and we didn't discover any abnormalities within her body. Wen-Siyu's face immediately turned extremely pale. Her dragon cry physique is very rare, and it's a type of recessive physique. Unless an external catalyst is introduced or it begins to take effect on its own, it's very difficult to detect. Those with such a physique would be able to progress quickly in their cultivation, but as their rate of progression increases, the yin and yang energies within their bodies will be thrown into imbalance. In the end, they'll inevitably perish before reaching the foundation establishment stage, Li replied calmly. So that means even if this poison is eradicated, our daughter still won't be able to continue cultivating. A panicked look appeared on Wen-Siyu's face, and her Dao companion's expression had also become quite grave. "We'll talk about those things later. Let me get rid of the poison within her body first. You two, leave this cabin for now. I'll call you two back in when I'm ready," Li instructed. Yes, the couple naturally didn't dare to object and could only exit the room. Upon seeing this, a hint of unease appeared on the young woman's face for the first time. Li turned toward her and abruptly swept a sleeve through the air. Azure light flashed, and Tian Kinner felt her vision blur before she slumped onto the bed, completely unconscious. Li began to carefully examine her again, as if he wanted to find out something by assessing her. After a while, Li sighed and murmured to himself, "She has the same aura. She's also a woman with the dragon cry physique, and she's well versed in formation spells. Is this really just a coincidence, or does reincarnation actually exist?" He then brought his hands together before separating them again, upon which a dozen or so shiny silver needles as thin as threads of silk appeared between his fingers. Li waved his hands through the air, and the silver needles shot forth, piercing into certain spots on the young woman's body with unerring accuracy, before disappearing in the blink of an eye. Li then made a series of hand seals as his fingers danced in an erratic manner. Bursts of light of all different colors flew forth from between his fingers, instantly transforming into a five-colored net of light that encompassed the young woman beneath it. Outside the wooden cabin was a small courtyard, within which Wen-Siyu and her Dao companion were standing. They were constantly staring at the door of the wooden cabin with concern flashing through their eyes. It appeared that the two of them really were extremely loving of their only daughter. The four Foundation establishment disciples stood off to the sides, not even daring to breathe too loudly. The wooden cabin was completely silent, and this silence was only further fueling the graceful man's anxiety. However, despite his concerns, he didn't dare to transmit his voice to Wen-Siyu. He knew just how powerful a late nascent soul cultivator's spiritual sense was, and he was well aware that there was no way his voice transmission would escape Li's notice. If he said something to irk Li, then the consequences could prove to be disastrous. Just as his concern and anxiety were reaching a boiling point, Li's voice suddenly sounded in his ears. "All right, you can come in now." The graceful man immediately rushed toward the cabin's door upon hearing this. As he did so, he took a glance at Wen-Siyu. She was also wearing a delighted expression, thereby indicating that she must have received the voice transmission as well. Thus, the man immediately pushed open the door and walked in without any hesitation. Wen-Siyu followed closely behind him. Li was still sitting on the same chair, and his head was lowered as he examined a ball of fist-sized azure flames in his hand. Within the flames were enveloped a few wisps of twisted and erratic black threads. Those threads seemed to possess a spiritual nature. Meanwhile, the young woman was lying completely still on the bed, seemingly sound asleep. The room was filled with an indistinct and peculiar fragrance that was extremely faint. "Seen your hand, my daughter. I fed her a dream return pill. You two can go and have a look at her for yourselves." Han Li cut off Wen Xiu's inquiry as he rose to his feet and left the wooden cabin. Wen Xiu was greatly relieved to hear this, and after expressing her utmost gratitude, she and her Dao companion hurried over to the bed to assess their daughter's condition. Letter 1D667, Letter 1D65A, Letter 1D65A, Letter 1D500, Letter 1D486, Letter 1D4EB. Letter 1D484, Letter 1D664, Letter 1D4F6. Meanwhile, Han Li was playing with the balls of flames in his hand as he walked into the courtyard outside. The 4 Foundation establishment cultivators were stunned by Han Li's emergence and immediately attempted to extend salutes toward this unfathomably powerful man. However, Han Li casually waved a hand at them, indicating for them to be at ease. He then made his way over to a corner of the courtyard and glanced at the ball of azure light in his hand, before abruptly rubbing his hands together. Golden light immediately erupted between his 2 hands amid the sound of rumbling thunderclaps. The azure ball of light only shimmered several times before it was reduced to wisps of smoke by the golden light. The twisted black threads also suffered the same fate as they were reduced to nothingness. An extremely foul and putrid odor wafted through the air, striking one with the urge to retch. Han Li's brows furrowed as he swept his sleeve through the air, sweeping up a powerful gust of wind that blew the horrible odor away. He then clasped his hands behind his back and looked up at the sky with his eyes narrowed, seemingly in deep thought. After a long while, he heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind him. Han Li turned around and said in an indifferent voice, "I've already eradicated the majority of the poison in her body, but it's best that you find the white yang demon fish's demon core, then get her to consume it raw. After that, if there are any remnants of poison within her body, it'll be expelled as well. Thank you for your great kindness, Senior. In my next life, I'll be sure to serve you as your most loyal servant to repay this debt." The person who was approaching Han Li was none other than Wen Xiu. "Next life, do you really believe in reincarnation for us cultivators?" Han Li asked in a rather peculiar voice. "I'm not sure what you mean, Senior." Wen Xiu was rather perplexed by this random question. "Forget about it, I was just thinking out loud. Let me issue you a warning. I injected some of my profound yin spiritual power into your daughter's body, which has temporarily repressed the backlash from her dragon cry physique. However, that's only a temporary fix. If she gives up on cultivation, she'll be able to live as long as a normal person with the assistance of some pills. However, if she does continue to cultivate, even if the yang-type energy in her body becomes just slightly more powerful, the spiritual power I planted in her will lose its effect and the backlash will commence again. Do you understand?" Han Li warned with a stern expression. "Is there really no way to eradicate the effects of the dragon cry physique? Please tell me if there's a way, Senior. I really wouldn't be able to bear the pain of outliving my daughter." Wen Xiu's face was slightly pale as she sank to her knees again. On this occasion, Han Li didn't stop her. Instead, he merely said in a calm voice, "There is a way, but it'll be very difficult for you to achieve it." Wen Xiu gritted her teeth with a determined expression and said, "As long as my daughter can cultivate again, I'll do anything, even if it means giving up my life." Han Li seemed to have been touched by Wen Xiu's maternal love, and his expression eased as he revealed, "This is not something that can be done by a mere core formation cultivator. However, if you had a nascent soul cultivator readily available to lend you their services, then this method can be achieved. It's actually quite simple. All you need is a nascent soul cultivator to inject some yin-type energy into your daughter's body every once in a while. In doing so, the yang-type energy in her body will be counteracted against, and she'll be able to continue cultivating. However, the prerequisite to that is that you must have a nascent soul cultivator who will come and go in your behest. Otherwise, you must get your daughter to constantly stay with a nascent soul cultivator. Of course, pills will need to be consumed during this process as well, and as her cultivation improves, the pills required will be more and more precious. If she reaches the foundation establishment stage, you and your Dao companion most likely won't be able to afford the required pills. I need a nascent soul cultivator that comes and goes at my behest." Wen Xiu's face immediately paled. Her heart sank as soon as Han Li described this method to her. No matter how much she loved her daughter, she knew that this was simply impossible. At most, she and her Dao companion would perhaps be able to beg a nascent soul cultivator to administer treatment to their daughter on 1 or 2 occasions, but who would be willing to essentially become a slave to 2 core formation cultivators? As for the other alternative of having a nascent soul cultivator constantly stay with their daughter, that was even less plausible. After all, nascent soul cultivators generally only accepted core formation stage disciples. Of course, if Tang Kinner was extremely beautiful and had extraordinary aptitude, it was possible that a nascent soul cultivator would make an exception for her. However, with her current sickly looks and her cultivation physique, how could they expect her to catch any nascent soul cultivator's eye? With that in mind, Wen Xiyu was plunged into complete despair. Her Dao companion had also made his way out of the wooden cabin just in time to hear Han Li's proposed solutions, and his face also paled with despair. However, he took a deep breath to muster up his courage before making his way over to Han Li. He extended a deep bow toward Han Li and said in an earnest voice, "We're not asking for much. We only want our daughter to live a little longer. Even if she only makes it to the foundation establishment stage, that's enough. Would my Dao companion and I somehow be able to combine our powers to repress the backlash from our daughter's Yang-type energy, just so we can help Kinner reach the foundation establishment stage?" Han Li glanced at the man before shaking his head as he said, "At your current early core formation stage cultivation bases, it would definitely be impossible. However, if you can reach the late core formation stage and be willing to sacrifice some of your cultivation base, you can give it a try." Even the man fell completely silent this time. They wanted to ask for Han Li's assistance, but they didn't dare to ask for more. Han Li had already provided them with more help than they had any right to ask for. No matter how much the two of them loved their daughter, they knew that it wouldn't be a good idea to keep pressing Han Li. After all, this was not an issue that could be resolved on a one-time basis. The solution would be for Han Li to constantly keep the young woman by his side, and it was quite clear that no high-grade cultivator would be willing to carry such baggage with them. However, to their surprise, Han Li provided them with an alternative arrangement, one that shocked them to such an extent that they couldn't help but think that they had misheard him. "I have a formation spells book here for your daughter. If she masters the contents of this book to a satisfactory degree the next time I see her, I can consider taking her under my wing. Of course, in that case, I'll also help her reach the foundation establishment stage and perhaps even the core formation stage. However, it's up to her to convince me to take her first. Let me make this clear now. This book is only for your daughter to read. If you too try to master the contents of the book, then attempt to teach her, I'll definitely be able to see through your tricks and I'll leave right away." Han Li's voice wasn't very loud, but his words exploded like claps of thunder in the hearts of Wen Xiyu and her Dao companion. "Senior Han, are you being serious right now?" Wen Xiyu was in complete disbelief. A faint smile appeared on Han Li's face as he swept a sleeve through the air. A jade box shot forth from within, hovering slowly toward the couple. That box contains the book Formation Spell Essentials. The formation spells depicted in the book aren't very complex, but there are some unique aspects that I'll be focusing on to test your daughter's aptitude in formation spells," Han Li said. The Formation Spell Essentials book in the jade box was one of the books that Xin Ryan had bestowed upon him all those years ago. Han Li felt that it was only fitting for him to give this book to Tian Kinner. Wen Xiyu was overjoyed as she carefully accepted the jade box. "Thank you for your kindness, Senior. Kinner is quite talented in the way of formation spells, so she definitely won't disappoint you. May I ask when you'll meet our daughter again?" Wen Xiyu asked with an urgent expression. "That's hard to say. If everything goes smoothly, maybe I'll see her again in a year or so. If not, it may take several years. Let me reinforce this. During this period of time, she absolutely cannot use any cultivation arts. Otherwise, if something goes wrong, she won't be able to live until she sees me again. Here is a vial of purple yin pills. Feed her one of these per month and she won't require any other pills for the next few years." And Li patted his storage pouch to produce an azure vial that was several inches in height, which he tossed to the couple. This time, the graceful man was the one who accepted the vial with elation and immediately began to express his gratitude. "All right, after you find the white yang demon fish's demon core, go to the Stalwart Star Island to wait for me a year from now. As long as you stay on that island, I'll be able to find you. I still have important matters I must attend to, so I won't stay here any longer." After providing this series of instructions, spiritual light flashed around his body, and he shot forth into the distance as a streak of azure light, not affording the couple an opportunity to keep him. The couple's expressions were slightly surprised by Han Li's sudden departure, but they still hurriedly bowed into the distance toward the direction he had just disappeared in. The streak of azure light quickly disappeared from their line of sight, and only then did they dare to stand tall again. They took a glance at one another, and both of them could see their own joy mirrored in each other's eyes. If it weren't for Han Li's help, even if they could cure the poison in their daughter's body, she would still most likely perish in the near future. Furthermore, Han Li had also helped Wen Xiu in her cultivation in the past, and the couple was extremely grateful toward him. After returning to the wooden cabin, the two of them began to discuss how they were going to search for the white Yang demon fish's demon core, as well as how they were going to organize for Tian Kinner to study that formation spell book. At this point, Han Li had already left Silver Shark Island. He abruptly changed directions and flew deeper into the ocean. He wore a contemplative look on his face as he streaked through the air. It was a spur-of-the-moment decision for him to give this Tian Kinner this opportunity. He wanted to meet her again mostly because he wanted to determine her true origin. After all, the fact that she possessed the Dragon Call physique in a female body and that familiar disposition she had made it very difficult for him to believe that everything was merely a coincidence. If her formation spell aptitude was also quite exceptional, thereby allowing her to easily glean the essence of that formation spell essentials book, then there was a good chance that she really was a reincarnation of Xin Ryan or possessed some other mysterious origin. There were actually past instances of reincarnations in the cultivation world, where the reincarnated person had retained some of their traits and memories from their past lives. These cases were extremely rare, but there definitely were precedents. However, none of those cases could actually be verified with evidence, and were only rumors that seemed to be somewhat plausible. Due to those rumors, legends regarding the underworld also began to circulate, and it had somehow become a mysterious existence akin to the spirit realm. Some speculated that the underworld was an independent realm, while others gandered that the underworld was a mysterious location in the human world. Of course, there were also those who were of the opinion that the underworld didn't exist and was only a figment of popular imagination. Han Li had always been sitting on the fence when it came to this matter. To him, there was no way to verify either side of the argument, so there was no point in thinking about it as it would just be a waste of time. However, Xianxia and Xin Ryan were good friends of his. In particular, he admired Xin Ryan's fiery nature greatly. Now that he had become an immensely powerful cultivator, if this Tian Kinner really was Xin Ryan reincarnate, then he wouldn't mind taking her under his wing. Furthermore, Xin Ryan had only been a foundation establishment cultivator at the time, yet she could already assist Xianxia in developing low-grade formation tools. If she had lived a long enough life, had sufficient formation spell books to reference, and saw more of the world, her achievements in the formation spell field would have been immeasurable. His main priority was to progress to the deity transformation stage, so he definitely wouldn't be able to focus much attention on studying formation spells. If he could take in a disciple with exemplary formation spell aptitude and raise her to become a formation spells master, she would definitely be able to provide much assistance to him in the future. After grappling with these thoughts for a long while, Han Li heaved a faint sigh and decided to set aside this train of thought for now. He suddenly flipped a hand over and a white jade slip suddenly appeared. He scanned through the jade slip's contents with his spiritual sense, upon which the image of a massive sea chart appeared in his mind. This was the map that the Star Palace cultivator guarding the teleportation formations had given him. Prior to coming here, he had already verified the location of the island that housed the high-grade spirit stone mine. This was once a nameless island that had since been named Green Spirit Island. Apparently, this was because most of the spirit stones discovered there were wood attribute spirit stones. According to the sea charts, this Green Spirit Island was located extremely far north of Silver Shark Island. Even a core formation cultivator would have to fly several months without rest to get there, and it was almost the farthest point that normal cultivators could reach, which was why the spirit stone mined on the island had only been discovered recently. It was said that this island was extraordinarily massive and was originally only inhabited by some demon beasts. The mines were distributed all over the island and they had been split among the Starfall Coalition, the Star Palace, the demon beasts in the sea. As large amounts of high-grade spirit stones were excavated from the island, the few islands nearby also began to thrive. Gradually, some smaller powers and itinerant cultivators gathered together, constructing a few small towns and markets that people could stop by on the way to Green Spirit Island. As such, a colony of human cultivators was established in what was once the middle of nowhere. Furthermore, it was said that the Star Palace, the Starfall Coalition, were both looking into setting up new teleportation formations near the island. Han Li assessed all of the information he had attained on Green Spirit Island again, and after deciding that he wasn't missing anything, he put away the jade slip and accelerated through the air. By his estimations, it would most likely take him 3 months to get the Green Spirit Island at his current speed. The scenery over the ocean was naturally extremely bland. There were only vast expanses of blue stretching as far as the eye could see in all directions, and there was nothing else to punctuate the stretches of seawater. And Lee continued on his journey, and more than a month had passed by in the blink of an eye. Along the way, he stopped by some islands to recover his magic power, and the journey had gone very smoothly. He hadn't encountered any mishaps or unexpected accidents thus far. He would occasionally pass by a few cultivators, but he merely flew past them without paying them any heed. Most of these cultivators were at the foundation establishment or core formation stages, and upon witnessing the speed at which Han Li was traveling, they naturally stayed out of his way in the knowledge that he was far too powerful for them to mess with. He did encounter an unidentifiable 6th-grade demon beast that sprang out of the ocean and tried to eat him. However, that demon beast was sliced in half by a stroke of his sword, and he plucked away its demon core for good measure. He had only slain the demon beast as it was of a relatively high grade. Otherwise, he couldn't even be bothered to swing his sword. On this day, Han Li encountered another small island that was piled up from black rocks. Aside from some seaweed, there was nothing living growing on the island. However, he descended upon it without any hesitation and sat down on a relatively flat rock before closing his eyes to recover his energy. Half a day passed, and the sky gradually began to darken. The crimson sun set beneath the horizon and the air temperature instantly dropped significantly. However, none of that was enough to faze Han Li. He merely summoned a layer of azure light to shield his body from the cold. When the final ray of sunlight disappeared, the entire surface of the ocean was plunged into complete darkness. Right at this moment, the entire small island that he was situated on suddenly tremored violently. Immediately thereafter, a loud roar that sounded like a muffled thunderclap erupted from the bottom of the ocean nearby. It was somewhere between the moo of a cow and the roar of a tiger. And Li's eyes immediately sprang open upon hearing this roar, and a surprised look appeared on his face. With the power of his current spiritual sense, even without intentionally releasing it, he could gauge the situation in a radius of several thousand feet around him as if it were second nature. Furthermore, prior to landing on this island, he had made sure to scan through the surrounding area in a radius of close to 50 kilometers, but was unable to find any demon beasts. However, now was not the time to consider these things. He immediately unleashed his spiritual sense with all his might toward the seabed around the small island. The roar had come from directly down below. Mere moments later, Han Li's expression changed, and he suddenly shot forth into the sky as a streak of azure light. He reached an altitude of several thousand feet in the blink of an eye before stopping there, looking down below with a grave expression. Almost at the exact same moment, gusts of sea wind intermingled with a foul odor were swept up. Countless vortexes of different sizes appeared on the face of the nearby ocean, and rows of massive waves, each over 100 feet tall, emerged one after the other. Loud rumbling booms erupted as the gargantuan waves crashed into each other, sending vast amounts of seawater spraying into the air above. A horrifying doomsday-like scenario ensued. Han Li spread his spiritual sense even further, and to his astonishment, he discovered that the sea in a radius of roughly 50 kilometers had all been plunged into the same state of turmoil. As his spiritual sense descended toward the seabed, it was forcibly sucked away by something after reaching depths of over 10,000 feet. Even though he reacted just in time to withdraw his spiritual sense, a small wisp of it had still been forcibly taken. A wave of shock surged through his heart as he hurriedly flew higher up into the air, awaiting the emergence of the creature in the ocean in a solemn manner. Could it be that there was some almighty demon beast down there? But even a 10th-grade demon beast seemed to be unable to stir up such a terrifying commotion. Perhaps this was a legendary deity transformation stage demon beast, but that didn't seem to be the case either. If he wasn't mistaken, once a demon beast exceeded the 10th grade, they would also be negatively affected by the lack of the world's origin chi in the human world. So how could it display its might with such reckless abandon? In doing so, it would be inflicting self-harm. As such, Han Li was rather perplexed. Theoretically speaking, once a demon beast exceeded the 10th grade, they would be assigned the same cultivation-based titles as human cultivators. Of course, it was also acceptable to continue to refer to them as 11th grade of 12th grade beasts. It was just that human cultivators normally wouldn't refer to them as such. After all, once a demon beast exceeded the 10th tier, they would become one of the most powerful beings in the human world. How would a human cultivator dare to regard such a fearsome being as just an ordinary demon beast? In any case, the commotion raging down below was simply far too intense. Even as a late nascent soul cultivator who had been through countless ordeals, Han Li was starting to get a little uneasy. However, whatever it was that was lurking in the depths of the ocean simply refused to reveal itself. Instead, it was only sweeping up winds and waves of greater intensity, to the extent that there were even colossal waves over 1,000 feet tall rising out of the water. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he finally made a decision. Regardless of what it was that was stirring up such terrifying phenomena, the best course of action for him was to refrain from taking any risks and getting away from this place as quickly as possible. With that in mind, he turned around and prepared to fly away from the small island down below. However, right at this moment, an extremely sharp screech suddenly erupted in his ear. He was caught completely off guard, and his head began to ring as a result. He was struck by a sense of dizziness and vertigo, causing him to plummet straight down from the air above. The protective barrier of azure light around his body was completely unable to keep out this ghastly noise. However, Han Li only plummeted down over 100 feet before a resounding boom erupted from his body. Purple flames exploded forth for several feet around him, and at the same time, arcs of golden lightning danced through the flames, completely shielding him within. Only then did the sense of dizziness disappear, and Han Li was able to arrest his downward momentum before hovering in the air again. However, his expression was extremely dark. He raised his head to look up into the sky as he could clearly detect that the sharp screeching noise had come from up above. A massive black shadow had obscured the murky gray sky completely without him noticing. There was no end in sight to this black shadow, but it was extremely blurry, giving one the sense that it was a mere illusion, thus creating an immensely unsettling sight to behold. That sharp screech had erupted from deep within that black shadow. Han Li looked up at the cloud and mist that had appeared overhead with a dark expression. He had been extremely careful and alert, yet such a massive phenomenon in the sky had completely escaped his notice. That was very strange in itself. He didn't have time to think too much about this matter as he carefully swept his spiritual sense upward. However, before his spiritual sense had even come into contact with the black shadow, it was rebounded by an invisible force, preventing it from being able to infiltrate so much as a single inch. That made him even more wary of what lay up above. After drawing a sharp breath, Han Li's body instantly transformed into a streak of azure light as hurtled into the distance. He didn't know what was going on, but it was naturally a good idea to get away from this place. At his current power level, he was able to travel close to 10 kilometers in just a few flashes when flying at full speed. Right at this moment, the sharp screeching noise coming from above suddenly came to an abrupt halt, and a burst of violent spatial twisting took place in the air above the island on which Han Li had previously been resting. In a certain section of the massive black shadow, a vast expanse of white light flashed, and a dazzling spatial rift emerged from thin air. A gargantuan creature then slowly emerged from the white light before descending toward the ocean. Han Li just so happened to catch sight of this when he turned back in the distance, and his heart immediately jolted with shock. He then carefully assessed the situation, upon which his expression changed drastically. That unidentifiable gargantuan object was clearly the claw of a certain demon beast. Not only was it entirely green in color, just the section that was revealed was several thousand feet in length. It was as if a huge mountain had appeared out of thin air. However, the claw seemed to be making extremely arduous progress, as it was emerging from the white light in a very slow manner. Even so, before the gargantuan claw had fully emerged, the vast spiritual power emanating from it was already making the waves down below clash more violently. Fearsome hurricanes were swept up on the surface of the ocean, and colossal waves over 1,000 feet in height had become a common sight. The black shadow in the sky was definitely obscuring a demon beast that was unfathomably huge. Furthermore, it seemed to be attempting to attack this world through a layer of space. Using the gargantuan claw as reference, this demon was at least tens of thousands of feet in length. Such an insanely gargantuan beast had only been heard of occasionally during the primordial desolate era. There was definitely no beast of such a mind-numbingly fearsome size residing in the human world at present. Hanli gulped nervously before immediately spreading open his thunderstorm wings. A loud thunderclap erupted as he transformed into a silver arc of lightning and disappeared on the spot. After flashing about a dozen times in rapid succession, Hanli finally caught sight of a hint of murky grayness at the edge of the black shadow, upon which a slight sense of relief welled up in his heart. However, before he had a chance to turn around, the beast at the bottom of the ocean suddenly let loose a loud roar that was filled with violent rage. Hanli's heart sank as he twisted around to look behind him. A resounding boom erupted as the small island that he had been situated on not long ago rapidly sank into the ocean. At the same time, a massive vortex with a radius of over 5 kilometers appeared on the surface of the ocean. Immediately thereafter, inky black mist began to waft out from the center of the vortex. There were initially only a few wisps of this mist, but it instantly began to expand drastically, turning gargantuan in size in what seemed like mere moments. The entire vortex had been filled by pitch-black mist before long, and not only could ghostly wails be indistinctly heard crowing from within, there were also peculiar arcs of black lightning that were flashing incessantly within the mist. What was even stranger was that all of the fish, shrimp, and other living creatures near the vortex were being sucked into it. All of them rapidly traveled toward the mist like moths to a flame, before being engulfed into nothingness in the blink of an eye. "That's ghost mist," Hanli exclaimed after identifying the black mist in the vortex. The substance that had surfaced from the bottom of the ocean was none other than the ghost mist, which had engulfed him once before. Even as a late nascent soul cultivator now, the sight of it still sent chills running down his spine. Even to this day, he still had a clear recollection of the sense of complete powerlessness he had been afflicted by in the Umbra realm. Thankfully, the ghost mist on this occasion seemed to be slightly different compared to last time, in that it was only tumbling and churning within the vortex instead of spreading in all directions. Hanli temporarily set aside his plan to flee the scene upon seeing that. At his current power level, even if the ghost mist were to spread once again, he would be fast enough to outrun it from such a far distance away. Thus, he stared silently into the massive vortex. He was certain that the beastly roar he had heard earlier had come from the ghost mist, which struck him with a sense of bewilderment. At this moment, the gargantuan azure claw had completely emerged from the white light, and just as Hanli had thought, it really was the claw of a certain beast. Azure spiritual light was flashing incessantly over the claw, and it had expanded to more than twice its original size, creating quite a harrowing sight for Hanli to behold. The sharp screeching that had cut off earlier erupted from within the black shadow again, immediately following which the colossal azure claw shuddered before 5 thick pillars of light shot forth from the tips of the claws, hurtling down below. The pillars of light were remarkably green and immediately disappeared into the ghost mist down below. As the giant claws began to move, the 5 pillars of green light began to stir up the ghost mist, causing the beastly roar erupting from within the vortex to falter momentarily before becoming even more thunderously enraged. The mist tumbled before converging to form a massive inky black mouth filled with sharp fangs, which took up the entire vortex. The 5 pillars of azure light were immediately swallowed by the massive mouth. Hanli was dumbstruck by what he was witnessing. Right at this moment, the huge black mouth closed, biting the 5 pillars of light in half before abruptly opening again. A thunderous boom erupted from within the massive mouth as an inky black bolt of lightning shot forth, vanquishing the 5 pillars of light with its fearsome might. The huge bolt of lightning then transformed into a pitch-black flood dragon before disappearing without a trace. In the next instant, the gargantuan lightning flood dragon appeared beneath the black shadow before plunging into the air above. An earth-shattering thunderclap erupted, following which the flood dragon forcibly tore open a white spatial rift before disappearing into it. Arcs of black lightning flashed wildly through the rift amid explosive claps of thunder. A howl of anguish then erupted as an azure feather that was over 10 feet in length fluttered down from the white light. The huge azure claws that had extended from the other side of the rift also abruptly withdrew themselves. Both spatial rifts began to seal over following that agonized howl. The black shadow that seemed to have obscured the entire heavens had also disappeared. The murky gray sky was revealed once again as a result. Almost at the exact same moment, the colossal vortex down below began to tumble violently, compressing all of the black mist together before absorbing it into the bottom of the ocean through an immense suction force. At the same time, the vortex rapidly shrank and disappeared in the blink of an eye. Not long after that, peace and tranquility resumed over the surface of the ocean. Aside from the fact that the island Han Li had been resting on had disappeared, there was no evidence to support the fact that such an ethereal, earth-shattering battle had just taken place.